Folks, so we are technically already in open session because we came out of closed session. So the meeting's already been called to order. First on our agenda,
Oh, yeah, you're right.
so we have the pleasure of swearing in a new board member tonight. So if I could have Mr. Wendell Hunnigan stand, please. And if you could, please read this.
These are my good glasses.
Well, Wayne always had two-person glasses.
Okay. It's entitled Board Member Oath and Conduct. I, Wendell Hunnigan, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully discharge the duties of the office of member of the Board of Education of Community Unit School District Number 205 in accordance with the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution of the State of Illinois, and the laws of the State of Illinois to the best of my ability. I further swear that I shall respect taxpayer interests by serving as a faithful protector of the school district's assets. I shall encourage and respect the free expression of opinion by my fellow board members and others who seek a hearing before the board while respecting the privacy of students and employees. I shall recognize that the board has no legal authority as an individual or that decisions can be made only by a majority vote at a public board meeting. I shall abide by the majority decisions of the board while retaining the right to seek changes in such decisions through ethical and constructive channels. As a part of the Board of Education, I shall accept the responsibility for my role in the equitable and quality of education of every student in the school board. I shall foster with the board extensive participation of the community, formulate goals, define outcomes, and set the course for the Community Unit School District Number 205. I shall assist in establishing a structure and an environment designed to ensure all students have an opportunity to attain their maximum potential through a sound organizational framework. I shall strive to ensure a continuous assessment of student achievement and all conditions affecting the education of our children in compliance with state law. I shall serve as education's key advocate on behalf of students and our community schools or schools to advance the vision of Community Unit School District Number 205. And I shall strive to work together with the district superintendent to lead the school district toward fulfilling the vision the board has created, fostering excellence for every student in the areas of academic skills, knowledge, citizenship, and personal development.
Thank you very much, Member Hunnigan. With that swearing in,
Welcome.
Allison, will you recall roll call, please?
Phelps,
Yes.
Rodriguez, Shorby,
Yes.
Walters, Cervantes,
Here.
Hunnigan,
Yes.
Lyon.
Yes.
Thank you. Now if you will stand for a moment of silence and the pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Now is the time of the board meeting where we have recognition of visitors. I will, in a moment, call to the podium visitors to address the Board of Education on any items germane to the role and function of the board. Please give your name and begin your statement. Persons are asked to refrain from making any personal comments regarding any specific individual, and I reserve the right to limit your presentation to 5 minutes. First, we have Rhonda Brady.
Hi, you just called on me because I'm the oldest.
Yours was the first.
That's good, we're alphabetical order, we'll go with that. I am Rhonda Brady, and some of you know me as a parent of District 205 students, not currently. Girl Scout leader, Steele School PTO president, treasurer, volunteer butterfly lady. I wear a lot of hats, and I have worn a lot of hats. But I really want to talk today about Steele School. And to help those of you that don't know me, my association with Steele School started in 1981. In the fall of 1981, my oldest child entered Steele when it was a middle school. The following year, I had multiple children enter when it was Steele Elementary School. And the final child left Steele School in, I think, 2002, if I figured things correctly. But I've watched District 205 over the years in the moving of classes, moving of students, all kinds of things. But I've been most involved recently in the environmental impact. And I'm a little concerned about some of those actions over the years. And it's time for me to talk about it. In 1996, 94 through 99 probably, I helped provide expertise as a University of Illinois Master Gardener, advice, and sometimes slave labor, that every elementary building in 205 ended up with a butterfly garden, a vegetable garden, or a prairie plot. Sadly, right now, Gale School and Nielsen and Steele School are the only ones that still have a remnant of what was started back then. And I understand with population changes that Gale School and Nielsen School will probably no longer exist in a few years. But I'm really concerned about the big plot behind Steele School. I noticed there is a fence around the property where the construction is going on. Not just the construction fence, but a nice black hurricane fence. It's not around the entire school property. In fact, the big prairie plot that was planted in 1998 by Cub Scouts with the Kiwanis Club and the Lions Club, and Steele School itself still exists, and it's in pretty bad shape. And I've worried about that over the years, that it hasn't been maintained properly. The plot does not cover the entire south property line. It only covers the southwest corner of Steele property. Over the years, Steele property has had to have retention ponds put in as more construction has taken place. There had been a butterfly garden on the corner of Main and McClure. It doesn't exist there anymore. There's a retention pond there. We've got more parking spots at Steele than ever before. And we have more of a footprint for the building than ever before. From an environmental standpoint, I'm really worried about that prairie plot and the trees that were planted as part of the class of 2000 tree effort that they started when they were sophomores. The eastern edge of that prairie plot was used as a small nursery for some of those trees that the students never found homes for in the rest of the community. The trees there are quite diverse. The prairie plot itself is quite diverse. If I compare that prairie plot to the prairie plot that the biology classes at GHS has, there's more diversity at Steele. I think we need to maintain that. I know that a seed collection of the prairie plot would yield a fantastic amount of diverse prairie plants, native prairie plants. I saw the agenda and saw that there's a removal of that plot tonight on your agenda. And it concerns me. I think that if 30 days could be given before a decision could be made, there could be seed collection, not just by the biology class, but also by the University of Illinois Extension, Master Gardeners, Master Naturalists. It would then enhance the GHS prairie because you'd have more diverse seeds to go in there without expense. The trees are helping dramatically with the runoff. Anybody in town on a heavy rain knows you don't go down McClure. You'll get flooded. The prairie plants and the trees help with that runoff. And sadly, Steele School is not on a flat property. I think between you, me, and the fence post, that prairie plant and those trees are helping flood, helping prevent flood from Steele's property to the neighboring housing authority property. There's a number of mulberry trees and bushes. I was there today and I noticed the plot isn't nice and square anymore. Somebody has been mowing around them. If there's a mulberry tree on the edge, that doesn't have to happen. The mulberry trees should be removed. I've really looked into all the different plants that were there today, and I came up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 very diverse plants that I could identify now, late fall. I have no idea what was there in the spring. I propose that there be a community collaboration for management of this property so that it can enhance the education of the students that are attending to Steele School or that will in the future. I sent a little message to my 7 kids and said, okay, what's your favorite memory being outside of Steele? 3 of them said the Foursquare. That doesn't exist anymore. 2 of them said having the older kids have their area and the younger kids have their area, and the undefined line that you could walk up and converse with your siblings. I've watched the playground go from tires brought in from Colebrook School that had to be painted so kids didn't turn black, to a very fancy brand new playground there now. The soccer field has moved 4 times that I'm aware of. But the one child that made the comment that I want to leave with you is that field day at Steele filled the entire back property. And right now, I haven't seen your plans, but there's not much property. I really don't want Steele to become an urban school in our rather rural setting. I'd love to see Young Farmers or FFA put in a little ag plot. Doesn't have to be big. Corn, soybeans, let kids know what these things are that they see if they're outside of town. Another Illinois crop that would be fantastic and would be fun to grow at Steele would be pumpkins. In closing, we live in an era of environmental crisis. We're called to be responsible stewards of the earth, to teach our children to be responsible stewards of the earth. It requires us to have more indigenous plants, native plants. growing in all the areas around us. I could go on and on about why we have a decline in insects and of course monarch butterflies. But I won't do that. I really want you to think about the fact that we need to, as a school district, teach in many ways. In lessons, activities, and examples. And I'm really concerned with whatever is done with the prairie will be done. But the district students will learn from the decisions that adults make. What lesson do you as a district want to teach the children about what to do when an environmentally ethical course of action is one that in the short term isn't the path of least resistance? Thanks.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Next up, we have Kara Downen.
Good evening. My name is Kara Downen. I'm the resource conservationist with Knox County Soil and Water Conservation District. I'm also a parent to 4 children in the school district. I'm a GHS grad myself and also attended most of our elementary schools in the time that Cook closed. Cook School closed in the time I think I was in 2nd grade, and I was bused to Nielsen and my sister to Gale, and totally understand all of that. So I can kind of sympathize with what's going on with kind of restructuring now. So I had 3 short items I wanted to mention. First being the Steele School Prairie Plot. I'm close friends with Rhonda Brady and also Roxanne Green, that'll speak shortly. I'm in favor of the school board considering leaving the native prairie plot or a form of a native prairie plot. If changing is what is needed, it would benefit an outdoor classroom setting. I know that there's native plots, I think at most of the school district properties, if not all of them. I haven't canvassed all of them myself. I know that Rhonda mentioned maintenance, and I know that Roxanne will have more on that, so I will not repeat what she's planning to talk about. Maintenance of a native plot would primarily be benefited by a prairie burn. I'm sure most of you are aware. That's not the only option. I know burning is kind of scary. You know, who wants to do that? It's right next to some housing, it's next to the school, next to a public road. So there's other options that our office can certainly help talk and have discussions over what other maintenance options are available. We work closely also with Pheasants Forever, and they have a field biologist on hand that also has Knox County in his area, so we can make contact with that. If the blocky size of the plot is an issue, and it would also be beneficial if the plot was even 30 feet wide. You could do linear native plots. So I wanted to bring that up. I know there had been, I had previously talked and had some information about solar panels being planned to be put in this area. So I wanted to point out that one, it's next to a ball field. My son plays practice there often, so that would not be, the ball field would have to be moved or a tall fence would have to be installed. But native plots and solar panels can go together. So all of the recent solar farms that were up for discussion in the county, on the county level, not in the city, I was on board with, and I had to write natural resource information reports, and all of those companies proposed a pollinator native plot of a short mix to go underneath those solar panels. So I know they would probably have to have a fence around them if that was the plan, which would kind of defeat the point of having an outdoor classroom, letting the kids be able to touch and look at, identify insects and identify plants. But if you were considering the solar panels somewhere else on the property, leaving this or putting them together and fencing off half of it, whatever was realistic for that. The next item I wanted to mention was the GHS construction. I personally, as a parent, taking off my soil and water hat here, I am not in favor of closing the high school during construction. And I just wanted to point out that Russell Construction has done recent work in town that I also inspected their job sites for their erosion control when they did Steele School and Lombard renovations recently, and then they also were doing work, I don't know if they still are, at St. Mary's Hospital, and to my knowledge, none of those buildings shut down at any time. So I don't know what else is required in your plan of work, but I wanted to put that out there, that they've done some recent work and it can be done. And then lastly, I just wanted to bring up the boundary discussion. I assume it's involving the elementary school boundaries. And I just wanted to ask the board to please consider maintaining and expanding the neighborhood model when deciding on boundaries. This supports a sense of community in our town, using like a radius approach from the school buildings. And again, I've attended most of the schools in town, most of the elementary schools. And it's nice when you can walk and play in your neighborhood and they're in your class. You know, when you're walking around your neighborhood and you see other kids playing and they don't go to your school, so you don't really know who they are, I mean, that kind of changes the identity of our community. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Roxanne Green.
Thank you. My name is Roxanne Green. I'm a retired Gale School teacher, having taught 27 of my 35 years in grades 3 and 4 at Gale. I currently work with students in grades K-2 teaching lessons about agriculture through the Knox County Farm Bureau as an Ag in the Classroom coordinator. I'm also an active member of the Monarch Migration Festival, which just held its 5th annual event last month. I enjoy teaching and watching students light up when they are learning. I was able to spend many hours outdoors with my students using nature as a foundation. Now, when I come into classrooms, the students always want to know if what I have brought to share with them is real. Real pumpkins, real branches from trees, real corn, real cocoa beans, real monarchs. They learn about their world with real things and always want to touch them. A real thing that Steele School has that is not available at either Silas or King is a prairie plot. I had heard about the concerns for safety, and I agree it needs to be addressed. I'm also aware that the site is intended for solar panels the district is leasing, which I'm excited about. However, I am not in support of the prairie's complete destruction, as I feel there must be a middle ground on this issue. I shared my concern of the loss of the prairie with the Migration Festival group, and the response was immediate. How can we help? Members of our group include U of I Extension, Master Gardeners, Master Naturalists, Pheasants Forever, and other individuals that support conservation, native plants, and other pollinators such as bees. All of these individuals are willing to help the district and Steele School to modify the existing garden, reduce its size, make it safe, as well as useful for the students and the community. During much of my time at Gale, our garden belonged to my students. They cleaned it out in the fall and spring, picked up the trash that blew into it, and took pride and ownership in it. We used the outside to create visual art and write poetry. It was much more meaningful and powerful for my students to learn this way, not to mention enjoyable. I believe Steele students and teachers should have the same opportunity. The 2 schools in our district that currently have a pollinator or prairie plot or garden are both closing. But these building changes provide an opportunity to create a new footprint of what future outdoor space at the elementary schools can look like. Many students in our schools do not have the opportunity to experience plants and soil up close, yet we live in an agricultural community. There's an endless list of ag careers available to students, but they have to develop an interest in it first. This can be realized by finding a way to have the solar panels and the garden exist together on the 12 acres that belong to Steele School. There are even pollinator-friendly solar fields that incorporate bird-friendly buffers if the current prairie plot is the only place the panels can be placed. Pheasants Forever is ready to assist in a fall burn of the prairie with the support of the local fire department as they use this kind of opportunity for firefighters to practice. I am told the district's cost would be $0. Our master gardeners and naturalists would work to remove invasive species in the spring and design a smaller, safer area with direct lines of sight into the prairie. The district's cost $0. I believe the students of Steele, especially those that do not have access to yards and gardens of their own, should have a safe outdoor space to learn about and experience nature. If there is some middle ground, and our group can be allowed to create a plan for the district by the November board meeting, we would like to offer our assistance. I've attached my contact information and the names of the groups who are currently supporters of the Migration Festival and have expressed a willingness to volunteer their help. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. And next we have Chastity Smith.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Chastity Smith, and I'm here on behalf of West Central Illinois Out of the Darkness Community Walk. We are a small group of people that have held a suicide prevention and mental health walk for the last 9 years in Knox County. And we have raised almost $200,000 that we would like to return to our community. We would like to start in our schools. We have several programs that we offer to teach the students and the teachers as well. Suicide is a rising crisis that affects all genders, races, ages, and social classes. No one is exempt from being affected by suicide or mental health issues. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for youth between the ages of 15 and 24, and the third leading cause of death between youth 10 to 14. Sorry, it makes me emotional. Nationwide surveys show that students in grades 9 through 12, 7.4% of these students have reported they've had at least one attempt. What we want to offer to you, I know suicide is scary to talk about, and we're not saying that we need to go in the classroom and talk to our students, you know, without some training. We have several programs that our schools offer, that the AFSP will bring to you for free of charge to help you. And with all of the legislation coming in that is asking you to provide that to our communities, we are telling you we can do that at $0 cost to you. They will come, and they are the leading fundraiser for mental health and suicide prevention in the world, not just in the state of Illinois. They will come and bring someone who is trained and licensed mental health first aid, Talk Saves Lives, More Than Sad. They have programs that's called Seize the Awkward for your students, where they can come and do like their prom night assemblies. Get students talking on how to seize the awkwardness when you know something's going on with a friend, a family member, whatever, to get people talking. Mental health is not going to go away. It's something we need to address. These students need to know that there's somebody there to talk to. If we can collaborate as a team and a community, as a strong forefront that they know they have someone safe they can talk to, we can provide these tools to our staff and teachers free of charge from the money we have raised walking each year in our community. And I would love to start in our schools. So I'm just going to propose these, leave these here for you guys to look at. If you have any questions, you can contact me. I have emailed some of you before tonight. Just thank you for giving us some time.
Thank you. Okay, next on our agenda, presentations to the board. First up, a report from Student Council.
Okay, hi, I'm Jakara Kelly. I'm a junior at Galesburg High School, and I'm the corresponding secretary to the GHS Student Council. Last Friday, October 4th, we had a blood drive in the GHS library, and it was very successful. We had 22 units of blood donated. We are having another one coming up soon, and I'll keep you posted on what that date is. On Wednesday, October 30th, we have our annual Haunted High School from 5:30 to 7:30 at GHS. Before that, we're going to have a coloring contest through grades K through 8 through all of the elementary and middle schools, and there's even one at the high school. And following that, after the judging, there will be prizes given out from Dick Blick Art. And then on November 8th at 7 a.m., we are going to be hosting a Veterans Day breakfast in honor of our veterans in the GHS North Cafeteria. And I'll keep you guys updated on that.
Any questions for Student Council? Thank you. if we could have Mr. Houston up to introduce our National Merit Scholarship students.
Good evening, elect members of the board and new board member Huntington. It's been a few years. You probably don't remember me, but I did have you in class out of Sanford just yesterday. I'm very pleased to notify you that we have 3 individuals who have been recognized as commendable students in the 2020 National Merit Scholarship Program. The letter of commendation signifies that each of these individuals are among about 34,000 commended students nationwide who have shown exceptional academic promise. Their index scores on the preliminary SAT National Merit Scholarship Qualifying Test placed them among the 50,000 of over 1.5 million students who entered the 2020 National Merit Scholarship Program. So they've done very well to get to this point, and we're very proud of them. At this time, if I could get the members of the board to come down front and administration to join me in celebrating these students, we will be presenting them with their letters of commendation. Our first student in the portal. Nora Leahy. Christopher Pamatna. I don't want to get you right because I said
Congratulations. Good handshake.
Congratulations.
We're very proud of these individuals. We hope that being named a commended student in the National Merit Program will broaden your horizons and encourage you to develop your potential to the fullest. Galesburg High School is very proud of you all and wish you all the best in pursuing your academic goals. We hope that you will be moving on to achieve your dreams from this point on. Congratulations once again, and if you could meet me in the hallway concluding this, we'll get your pictures taken and get you out into the Twitter world and the Facebook world. So, out there, we'll take them real quick. If we could give them a round of applause.
Just didn't want to be surprised.
Thank you. Next on our agenda, we have a presentation on our annual financial report. Ron Hilton, thank you.
Thank you. I'm here tonight to give you kind of a brief synopsis of our audit for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2019. I think in your board packet information you have a nearly 100-page document, which is the annual financial report, which I will not go over in detail. I thought you'd appreciate that. Also, you have about a 7 or 8 page document, which is kind of a summary. As I've done in the past, I will go over that, just hit some of the highlights for the year. If you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me at any time, and I'll try to answer those the best I can.
Can I just interrupt with one thing?
Yes.
Because of the way we're doing our agenda now, the entire document's available to everyone
Okay.
who wants to read it. It's all there as a part of our agenda.
Okay. As I said earlier, we have completed the audit of the June 30th, 2019 annual financial report. The annual financial report is a regulatory basis report that is required by the Illinois State Board of Education. And we did prepare that financial document on the accrual basis of accounting. We did issue an unmodified opinion on the regulatory basis of accounting. That is the clean opinion, the best opinion you can get on your financial statements. Just a couple required communications. There were no new accounting policies adopted during the year by the board. We had no difficulties in performing our audit. We had no disagreements with management on any financial, accounting, reporting, or auditing matters. We did not have any findings. And the only journal entries that we made were, as we do typically every year, we made some journal entries to assist in converting the financial statements from the cash basis to the accrual basis of accounting. So again, a very clean audit, as always, here at Gilsburg. Now I will briefly go over some of the highlights for the year of the 7 or 8 page document that you should have. The first page is the condensed balance sheet for your operating funds. The Illinois State Board of Education defines the operating funds as your educational, operations and maintenance, transportation, and working cash funds. The first section on that sheet is the total assets. The total assets in the operating funds of the district at June 30th, 2019 were approximately $37.9 million compared to $31.9 million in the prior year, or an increase of approximately $6 million. A couple of the larger items, the first two items in that section, cash and investments. You had total cash and investments of about $22.9 million in your operating funds. That was an increase of approximately $200,000 over 2018. The next item is your taxes receivable, your real estate taxes receivable. That was about $13.3 million in 2019 compared to about $7.3 million in the prior year. Well, that's an increase of about $6.1 million. Why that jumped up so much, you didn't raise your real estate taxes that much. Knox County was just late in paying the first distribution of taxes. Normally they make a large distribution of taxes at the end of June. They did not make that distribution this year. So you actually received that large distribution of your first real estate tax payment in July. So it's a timing issue, so that's why it appears to be larger. Next section down are your liabilities. You had total liabilities of about $9.4 million in 2019 compared to about $9.7 million in 2018, so just a slight decrease in your liabilities. And the last section is your total fund balance. You had total fund balance at June 30, 2019 of about $28.5 million compared to $22.3 million, or an increase of about $6.2 million between the years. Of that $28.5 million, as you can see, you have about $500,000 that are reserved for specific items. So with your unreserved fund balance of about $28 million, the district has met the board's goal of a revenue to fund balance ratio of 2 to 1. Also with the cash and investments of about $22 million, you've also achieved your goal of having cash on hand of 180 days. So congratulations on getting there. Well, as you can see in a couple of the slides coming up, you weren't there a few years ago. So. On the next page, condensed statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances. Again, this is just for your operating funds. The first section are revenues. Your total revenues in the operating funds were about $45.5 million. They're pretty flat, only increased about $100,000 from the prior year. Your next section down are total expenditures. They were about $39.2 million, which is a slight increase of about $300,000, which is less than a 1% increase in your expenditures from year to year. So obviously, as you can see, you've done a good job controlling your costs between years for your operating funds. And that leaves you with a change in fund balance of an excess of about $6.3 million for the year, and an ending fund balance again of about $28.5 million. Not on this sheet, but just one thing I did want to point out because it was so significant. You did issue approximately $40 million in bonds this year, 2019. It's not included in the operating funds. Those bond proceeds show up in your capital projects, your construction funds, and those were issued to fund the upcoming construction on your projects you have going on. The next page is the statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance just for your educational fund. About halfway down the page in your educational fund, for 2019, you had total revenues of about $41 million compared to about $39.4 million in 2018, for an increase of $1.6 million. The largest increase in that is in the middle section, your state sources, in your evidence-based funding, which is formerly known as general state aid. That was about $18.8 million compared to about $17.8 million in 2019. Or in your educational fund, that increased about $962,000. There was some different reallocation. In total, though, for the year, your evidence-based funding for all the funds went up about $725,000 from 2018. The next section down is your expenditures. Total expenditures were about $35.3 million compared to $35.1 million, or again, only a slight increase of about $200,000 from year to year. And that would leave you then with a excess of revenues over expenditures of about $5.6 million and a total fund balance in your educational fund of $20.7 million. The next fund is the operation and maintenance fund. About halfway down the page, your total revenues, about $1.9 million compared to about $2.2 million from the prior year, or a decrease of about $281,000. That decrease is mainly made up of the first section of your local sources, your real estate taxes, about $1.7 million in 2019 compared to about $2.1 million in 2018, or a decrease of about $350,000. And that decrease was solely due to you lowering your tax rate from 50 cents down to about 34 cents. So that obviously was a planned decrease in your revenues in your O&M fund. Total expenditures for the year were about $1.9 million compared to about $1.9 million in the last year. So you had a decrease of about $4,700 in your expenditures. So again, you held your expenditures tight there in your operations and maintenance fund. That left you with a slight excess for the year of about $40,000 and an ending fund balance at June 30, 2019 of about $2.4 million. The next page is your transportation fund. You had total revenues in your transportation fund of about $2.5 million compared to $3.6 million in the prior year, or a decrease of $1.1 million in revenues in that fund. The main source of that decrease up in the top section, your local revenues. The last item is other local sources. You had zero in 2019, about $1.2 million in 2018, and that was a one-time refund of about $1.2 million that you received when you withdrew from the Knox Warren Special Education District. So that was a one-time thing. You'll never see that again. Total expenditures were about $2 million in 2019 compared to about $1.9 million, for a slight increase of about $100,000. And that does leave you with, again, another excess of revenues over expenditures of about $479,000 and an ending fund balance of $3.4 million. The next slide is a graph. It's a 5-year historical graph comparing your operating funds revenues and expenditures. The blue line represents your revenues, the red line is your expenditures. As you can see, there in 2015 and 2016, your expenditures did exceed your revenues. In 2016, you actually had a deficit in your operating funds of about $2.3 million. In 2017, that trend reversed and continued into 2018 and 2019, where you can see in 2019, in your operating funds, you did end up with a total excess of about $6.3 million. And you can see in 2017 to 2018, your revenues did increase significantly. What I could find is the general state aid in that time increased about $2.8 million, and you did begin receiving federal special ed grants when you broke away from Knox Warren. Those grants then came to you, and that was about $1 million worth of additional revenue. The next slide is the operating funds graph of fund balances from 2014 to 2019. As you can see, 2014 to 2016, you had been running deficits, and your fund balances had actually decreased to a low of about $14 million in 2016. Then in 2017 to 2019, you did reverse that trend and had excesses of revenue over expenses. And as you can see, your fund balance has now increased to about $28.5 million. So quite a turnaround in 3 years from where you were at that point in 2016. The next graph just kind of shows the sources of your revenues in the operating funds. As you can see, the gray is your evidence-based funding, which is about a total of 43% of your total funding you receive in your operating funds. And your real estate taxes are about 33%. So in total, 76% of your operating fund revenues come from these two sources. So those are your largest two significant sources of revenues. Then the final page is a similar graph for your expenditures. It's your 2019 expenditures by object. As you can see, your single largest expenditure are salaries and benefits. That made up about 79% of your total expenditures for 2019. And that's down slightly from 2018. You had about 80% of your total expenditures were salaries and benefits. So in closing, the district had now a second year in a row of surpluses. I think hopefully we turn the corner and reverse those negative trends you had back in the mid-2010s. So that concludes my specific comments. Anybody have any questions?
Any questions?
How would you judge the fiscal health of this school district? Would you give it an A, a B, or a C?
I would give it an A. I mean, compared to other districts I audit. Also, your annual financial report, I think is on page 4 or 5, as a financial profile score, and you are at the highest level of the ISBEs, the recognition in their profile score, so that is the highest level. They have 4 levels, and recognition is the highest. So, and it would be higher too, but your debt level has gone up, and that's one of those. I think there's 5 factors that affect the financial profile score. But that's from a financial standpoint, you're in a strong fund balance position and strong cash position also.
Any other questions? Thank you, Ron.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
I know. Sorry, I'm having a moment. That was a lot of hard work. This district, to reverse what we saw, or what I saw as the only remaining board member up here from 2015 to see those numbers and to know that we have met our goals as a district. 2-to-1 ratio and 180 days working cash on hand, when we were sitting up here not too many years ago talking about having to close the schools, or what would that look like. So, to me, that's quite an accomplishment. And I want to thank everyone who had a part in that, because it was not easy all the way around. But we made it through, and I appreciate hearing both from last month and this month that our ratings are good. Next on our agenda is approval of the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Is there any item on the consent agenda that anyone would like removed? Allison?
Sharpie?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Hunnigan?
Yes.
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Aye.
Next, focus area 1, relevant skills that lead to employability. First agenda on that item, or first item on that part of the agenda is the administrative report on curriculum. Ms. Springer is out ill. Dr. Asplund?
Thank you. You have a report from Mrs. Springer that she submitted to you, and I'll ask her to expand upon that next month. One thing that I did want to make the board aware of is the fact that Mr. Houston and I recently met with Ken Springer, and had a very long presentation from Mr. Springer, which I very much appreciated, about employment trends in the area. And so we started talking very specifically about how can we better support our employers. And I'm happy to report, and I can't get into the specifics yet, but we will. I'm happy to report that we are very close to starting a class next semester that will specifically train one of the area employers on some very high-level skilled work that our graduates can do right out of high school. So we will be reporting on that in the future, and I'm really excited to get into the specifics of that. At this point, it's a little too early for that, but very appreciative of Mr. Houston and Mr. Springer, and being able to get a lot of that work done very quickly when we saw that there was a big need. We had an employer that said they could not find workers here, and we said we wanted our graduates to have jobs, and so how can we get those two to work together? And so very quickly we're putting together a plan to do that. And, as I said, we'll be coming back with some specifics next month.
Any other questions about the report submitted by Ms. Springer? Okay. Next item, special education report, Dr. Mashad.
Good evening. Updates to my report. We hopefully tonight will hire a teacher for January for one of our positions at Churchill. She is a mid-year graduate. We also have another interview set up for November to try to bring on a second mid-year graduate for another one of our positions. So we're trying to go out there and recruit some mid-year graduates to Galesburg. Also with paraprofessionals, we had all our positions filled until we must have opened our mouth and we had a resignation. So we are continuing to try to interview to fill that position. And of our 2 psych positions, I have an interview set up the first week in November for our intern to talk to him about a possible position with the district next year. So, any questions?
In your report, it notes that there's going to be projecting a decrease of 16 students needing services. Are they becoming more capable of graduating?
Well, my numbers are off a little bit. As I found with my ParaPro hour sheet, it contracted some kind of a virus and it threw it off. My numbers are also off on this sheet. Mr. Sherby caught some of those. So really I'm at 658, and last month we were at 665. We have had approximately 10 students leave and about 4 students come in the last month. So it is a continual revolving door.
Any other questions for Dr. Michelle?
I'm recreating my sheet for next month since I appear to have a virus on this one. My auto adding isn't working. But we do every month. We lose some, we gain some. We have some initials, we do some drops, so it is a constant up and down.
How does a student qualify for special ed?
So a student could qualify for special ed under 13 different categories that the state board recognizes under IDEA. And so we look for a student that might have some concerns in one of those 13 areas. So from hearing to vision to physical learning, it could be medical things such as emotional things going on, trauma, ADHD. So, there are some concerns noted either by parents or teachers, and we take a look at the data that surrounds that student and then determine if a case study is open. So we look at 2 factors. Is there a disability? So through either doctor diagnoses or through school data, is there a disability that's unidentified? And then the second is the adverse effect. So does that disability adversely affect that student's education? So a student could have ADHD, but there may be no impact to the academics. So having a disability doesn't say you have an individual education plan and you qualify for services. You have to have the second prong of adversely affecting their academics.
Any other questions? Thank you. Next up, building reports. Any questions from board members regarding the building reports submitted by administrators?
I like the new format.
Okay. Next up, focus area 2, facilities that assist in skill acquisition. First on that is the enrollment report. Any updates or points that you want to mention, Dr. Osman?
Just that we continue to show a drop in enrollment, and that depends on buildings. There's not really a trend that we can identify necessarily, although the high school would be where more of the students have been reduced. And obviously, we're concerned with the number continuing to go down, and every month we monitor it. That's the one highlight that I could give for this month.
And I know that in the past we've asked and you've mentioned that you do try and reach out and find out while people are leaving. Do you only do that at the end of the academic year, or do you do that in, like?
We have done it just at the end of the year to try to get all the people from the previous year to try to get a trend. That's what we've been doing. We did it again this year, and I did not report on it. I would have initially told you that we seem to lose quite a bit of students to area schools, and I guess that would be true, but then when we looked at the overall, we also gained a lot of students from area schools. So the net really wasn't anything of any statistical significance. We still see more of a block of people moving away from the area and out of state than we do much of anything else. There's not really any neighboring district that could claim a big influx of our students any more than we can claim a big influx of their students. So there's a lot of mobility within the bi-county region, really between Warren and Knox County. But there's more of an outflux really to other states than anything else.
Could you give us some numbers in terms of how many students we are losing this year from last year, or?
Well, I mean, you have the enrollment report there that you can see, and yeah, we can go back and do some digging on total aggregate, like out of state versus this state, but then we also have to add in the kids that we got moved in. But we can get you that, sure.
Okay, thank you.
On this attendance report, it may be interesting, you have, by group, you have the 6-day enrollment and you have the current enrollment. If we're looking at knowing comparison, another column would be this date a year ago.
That's on there. It's a tab on there.
Oh, it's a tab, I keep forgetting that. Thank you. Damn tabs. Oh, there.
Darn.
Darn. Thank you. every time consistent.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right. Next, consider approval of Lombard change order for current transfer compartment. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Ms. Sam?
I'm actually going to turn to Lee Marbach, who's from Russell Construction. He's going to be talking about our change orders, and he can explain a little bit more in depth on why we're needing to do this and exactly what the transformer compartment is and why we need to do that. So, Lee, go ahead.
I think you'll be up here for a while.
Yes.
Hopefully not too long. So the first one here is for the current transformer compartment, or CT compartment at Lombard. During the move and the addition at Lombard, we are relocating the transformer itself. And with working with Ameren on that transformer relocation, they're not grandfathering in Lombard's current transformer compartment location, which is in the building. They want it to be exterior within 50 feet of the meter. The new transformer will be 75 to 100 feet from the meter. We went back and forth with the engineer and Ameren trying to get a variance, and we're unsuccessful doing that. This will look similar to what is at Silas Willard if you drive by there. That transformer has a big aluminum box on the outside, which is the current transformer. So it's a step-down transformer, or where the power comes in, a step-down to the building. So this is the change to move the current transformer CT compartment from the existing building to the new pad.
Any questions?
Yes, why wasn't this in the initial engineering for the building?
So I'll defer to Brian, but typically my understanding is when we put a new switchgear into a building, so when we upgrade a service, like we did at Lombard or other facilities, you do a new CT cabinet. Lombard's switchgear is not getting upgraded, it is staying the same. We're just relocating the transformer itself. So the transformer's not getting any bigger or changing in size, it's just moving. And when we moved it, it wasn't anticipated we'd have to change anything with the service in the building, but Ameren's telling us otherwise. I don't know if you have anything to add, Brian?
That is a perfect explanation.
It doesn't explain why this wasn't the original engineering, though. I don't understand this.
Because there's certain things that happen to cause you to have to change the compartment. And we felt like this was within the scope of things that we wouldn't have to change it. Ameren interjected themselves in the process and said they're not gonna give us a variance of the 25 feet, so that we have to change the compartment because it has to be within 50 feet of each other. So that it didn't hit what we internally would know we would need to do to change it, because you're not upgrading the service, you're not putting in a new panel, you're not doing anything like that, so it didn't necessitate a change on our end. It wasn't until Ameren told us that we had to change it.
So when we developed these plans, we're not in consultation with the electric supplier then?
Yes. In our initial talks with Ameren, they were under the assumption that the switchgear was also being changed out, which was not the case. It was not needed to be switched out, so they assumed that with the switchgear change out, the CT cabinet would also be changed. But that was not the design of Lombard. It was to be cost effective and move the transformer outside the footprint of the addition. So there was no communication on the CT requirements during the design of the transformer.
Yeah, and the plans that were shown to Ameren never showed a new CT compartment either, so, you know, yeah.
So is this a code, or is this an Ameren we want?
Ameren is my understanding, talking to the electrical engineer.
Yes, it's Ameren. It's both Ameren with the CT cabinet location, and then their subcontract with the meter, whoever they subcontract to the meter, saying that they don't want the meter further than 50 feet from the CT cabinet.
Yeah, the existing meter location would be inside the courtyard, and we asked for a variance to leave the meter there and do a remote read, and they wouldn't do that either. They're requiring the meter to be exterior of the building, and in the courtyard is still considered in where they can't read it, is what they're saying. So we've looked at different opportunities to not spend this. We've kind of hit dead ends everywhere we went, and so that's kind of.
Thank you for looking.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Allison?
Sharpie?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Hannigan?
Aye.
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Aye.
Next, motion to consider approval of lumbar change order for generator. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
I'm assuming this is,
Yep. So this one is during the site investigation of this transformer, the electrician brought up that there's an existing cabinet on the side of the building that is, was designed, I think maybe in the last renovation, if you wanted to have a emergency generator on trailer, rent one, hook it up to the building in case of a power outage. We realized that we're going to enclose where that box is, that's in the courtyard, so it would render that connection point unusable. So we brought up to the district if they want to relocate that emergency generator connection outside of the building where you could hook up to it in the future if need be. This is the additional wire to extend that, that box and that hookup.
How many times have we ever used that emergency hookup?
Not to my knowledge.
I think 0 would be.
Not used it.
If we ever wanted to put a generator, that would be the location. We wouldn't want it in the courtyard anyway, correct?
No.
So we would have to, if at a later date, we wanted to put in our own generator, regardless if it was the back, a rented one,
Right.
but just our own gas powered, we would have the ability to do such.
Right.
We wouldn't unless you moved this connecting point,
Correct.
correct?
Yeah,
Or we
so
would have to
It would be more difficult.
moving fuel through the new commons
Or you put a
to
generator.
gas up the
And
generator
you'd
if
have
we
to-
didn't wanna do that.
You'd have to crane in the generator over top of the building too. So this would be moving the connection point next to the transformer, which is next to the loading dock, or the drive lane, transformer, the dumpster enclosure is in the same area. So it's really the cost for the aluminum conductors and conduit is really all it is.
So we have solar going in out there. So what are the odds, so help me understand the need for this?
Solar does not work during a power outage. And here's why. When you sign up to put solar power in on your building, wherever that is, you also have to promise that it will get shut off automatically when there's a power outage, and there's a very good reason for that. Because legally, when you put solar on your building, Ameren has to allow for it to go out on the grid if we're using excess of what or if we're generating excess of what we're using, okay? So if there was active solar when there's a power outage, a guy working on the lines is gonna get electrocuted. So you have to have an automatic shut off on solar so it does not get used for battery backup.
I guess
Are
I'll
we
add.
considering having a backup generator attached to this many times? I know we have one at Willard.
We have one.
That's because we have rent out that space, correct?
Correct, so that's because the tech center is there, and we need to ensure the generators are available at all times there. It's something that we could definitely add at a later date.
We
if
couldn't do that unless this connection was outside the
Correct.
courtyard.
Correct.
This is the time to do it before we start building.
And I will say that we did look at multiple options. There was a more expensive option to run copper conductors, because copper is more expensive than aluminum, but we did price that option. With electrical feed lines, when you go to aluminum, you upsize the conduit and you upsize the feed line because of the resistance of the different types of metal. So this was the most economical option to extend it. The current feed is copper, but we're extending it with aluminum, just like with the primary feed of buildings, aluminum as well to keep costs down, so.
Any other questions?
So move.
Allison?
Cervantes?
Aye.
We already had that, right?
Mhm.
Hannigan?
Aye.
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Aye.
Sharpie?
All right, next, a motion to consider approval of Lombard bid package 2. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right, so what I bring to you tonight, we did go out for rebid on flooring. If you recall, when we brought in bids on Lombard originally, we had no bids were submitted for flooring. So we went out for rebid on flooring. At the same time, we bid out King's bid package 1, who did get 2 bids this time around, which we were pleased with. Moore's Floor was the apparent low. We did scope them out and had they did cover all the specs, and we're recommending approval of Moore's Flooring, along with accepting the alternate number 1 LVT, which is a product change in mainly the new addition space, a handful of rooms there. So, and I think the LVT, we talked about in the past of the reason we had that as an alternate bid, if we could afford it. There's some long-term maintenance without wax, because it doesn't require waxing and that kind of thing. So overall, that is, the bids came in under our budget with Moore's coming in, which allowed us to accept the LVT, or the LVT alternate. And, yeah.
Where are they from?
They are from Quincy.
And you vetted the prevailing wage situation with Moore's?
Yep, they're aware of prevailing wage and have done it before in other areas, and I don't see any issue or concern there, so.
How long will this project take? Do you have any idea?
The flooring itself will start in the addition, I would say next spring, when we get that up. And then the majority of the work is in the addition, or the remodel space. So they're probably on site for, I would, probably say give or take, the stopping and starting a couple months, 2-3 months. So majority of the work will be next summer before they really get started.
Any other questions?
Well, we all received an email today concerning the prevailing wage issue. And I don't know if has necessarily been resolved, has it?
And they pay prevailing wage.
Yeah, they said they pay prevailing wage. The process, I guess, to give you an idea, for prevailing wage is at every pay application that they submit, they're required to submit prevailing wage back up to all the hours worked, certifying that they did pay that wage. That's then collected and put on file at the district, and we keep a record as well, in case there's any concern or any inquiries that happen. We can then provide that information. So,
Is the prevailing wage just for this bid, or is it for?
It's all for all public work. So every, yeah, any contractor has the DOL, or I guess that'd be the state of Illinois has a prevailing wage chart per category, whether they be iron workers, carpenters, laborers, electricians, what have you, and they have to certify that they are paying that prevailing wage during the project. So that's in the specifications, it's in their contract, and they're required to pay that wage and then also certify that they do pay it with each pay application.
So Lee, when you contacted them specifically, or any of these bidders, since we're talking about Moore's Floors,
yeah.
When you contacted them, what question do you ask them?
I said, do you understand that's a prevailing wage job in Knox County? Because it's county specific.
Right.
So, and that they certify that they have included that in their bid. And I said, yes.
So during the bid process, there's a note in there that says that they understand that this is part of the
Right.
job. And just so everybody understands, so if, let's say hypothetically, we accept a bid for whatever, and the employer submits that they know they have to pay prevailing wage, and they submit to us paperwork that they paid prevailing wage, and then somebody sues them that they did not pay prevailing wage, we're not on the hook for that. We did what we could do to make them pay prevailing wage. So if somebody sues the district, they're really not suing the district, they're suing the vendor.
Really, the only thing you'll see come out of it is if somebody wants to question whether they pay prevailing wage, they can issue a, I don't know the right word, kind of like a FOIA, if you will, and request all the backup from the district. Then the district can then present that backup, and we've done that before on other projects in the
Right.
district.
We did it with
Last time-
Silas Willard.
Yeah, I think every job I've been on here, we've had it so far, so usually just someone, I think the high school field house, we had the same thing with the geothermal wall driller. Somebody said they weren't paying prevailing wage. I think Bush Turf because they're turf specialists, they said they weren't, and again, they go through this, it's kind of a, runaround, but, they have to prove that they are, and then they go through an audit. But yeah, it's a tactic that some people use to, kind of control the market, I guess, is what I would say.
It also occurred when we did the roof on this building 2 summers ago.
So, what you're seeing there in that letter is someone notifying you that they intend to keep an eye on the project and reserve the right to request information further, so.
So we don't have any concerns. And I heard you mention it's a county thing, so not all counties require.
No, it's rated by county,
Oh,
so
rated
Cook
by-
County's more expensive than Knox County,
Right.
which is more expensive than
Okay.
White
Yeah.
County.
Yeah, so your wage rates by county, so they factor in cost of living and what the local market is in this area, so.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one last question. How much is this project going to cost?
So with Moore's, we are at
183,211.
183,211 is the flooring contract for this one. So that's for all the VCT, LVT, and carpet.
Okay. Allison?
Cervantes?
Me first.
Yeah.
Lee, do this.
Came around.
Aye.
Hannigan?
Aye.
Lyon?
Yes,
Phelps?
Aye.
Sharpie?
No.
they're paying it.
Oh, they better.
We also have board policy requiring.
I know that we have a board policy that requires it, I just wanna make sure that we're doing our due diligence and that, we're doing our due diligence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Motion to consider approval of King Elementary bid package 1. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All right.
All right, so King Elementary bid package 1. This is the first bid package, which is the structural concrete for the building and structural steel. We'll be coming next board meeting with the bid documents for the rest of the building, to start that process out, but to get started and meet deadlines and the schedule, we gotta get started on the stuff underground. So, we had good participation. We had 5 concrete builders, we had 4 steel fabricators, and we had 6 steel erectors. So pretty good participation, very happy with that. What I'm bringing to you tonight is a recommendation for approval of NAP Concrete, I think it's NAP Concrete, for the bid package 1A. Design build structures for bid package 1B, and then Tri-City Ironworks for bid package 1C. We vetted all of them out, and they all have a complete scope, and feel pretty confident with them. Yeah.
I know I've asked this question before, but how can there be $130,000 difference on the steel erection?
Maybe you don't need to work.
Yeah, I was surprised too, to be honest with you, and I talked exclusively with the bidder. I know that Tri-City Ironworks got the bid for Lombard. They are a newer company, off-branch. They're actually a division of Tri-City Electric out of the Quad Cities now.
Really?
Yep, so they started a millwright and ironwork division because of all the wind power and other facilities, and the guys came over to start that, and I think it's really relative to who has what slot open and if they need to keep their guys busy. That's really what I see. I know with different people, if they want to bid because they want to make sure they don't get left out next time, but if their slots are full, they're going to make sure to hedge their bid, that if they get it, that they make money at it. So that's about the only thing I can tell you. The market is pretty busy right now, and some people do have a pretty full schedule.
Any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah.
With these being very, I think, how much below what your estimates are these?
These were about $200,000 lower than original estimates. We do have some stuff still in flux with the design to know where that will land with the overall project. But yeah, for our initial estimates for these scopes, we're about $200,000 to the good.
On this package?
On these packages, right. But there's some flux of the final design for the rest of the project specifically around civil, which we don't know where it's gonna land yet, so.
Because there's $400,000 difference in concrete.
Yeah, I was really surprised with that as well. And I think it goes back to the NAPCA concrete, which, I did vet them out. They're out of the Peoria area in general.
Okay.
But they really went after it hard, and I think they had a slot to fill this fall. And there's not a whole lot of opportunities of projects that start right away, so keeping their guys busy is kind of paramount for them.
Sorry, any other questions? Allison?
Hannigan?
Yes.
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Aye.
Sharpie?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye.
She forgot you.
First, I don't want to vote, now I just jump over Member Sharpie to vote. Okay. Next, motion to consider approval of the prairie plot removal at Steele Elementary. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Oh, second.
All right, questions?
Well, first of all, I'd like to appreciate the input we've received from the community today on this project. Our hope is to maintain as much green space as possible for our children. And who's speaking on this?
Well, I know Mrs. Ham's got some information, but I'll also add some things. So I think the point about, well, they're all excellent points. The point about the controlling the floodplain is a really cogent point. I mean, that's a really, that can be a big problem. And so I think that's something that we need to consider very strongly. There was, and I don't remember who mentioned it, just to be clear, none of this has to do with the solar field. That's slotted for a different part of the grounds. This all arose from some areas of some concerns with some materials that we found in there, in addition to some visibility issues. So, at this point in time, obviously this is the board's prerogative, but I don't know that this is completely time sensitive at this point, is it?
We have iron hustlers out there now, so.
Right, other than them.
Right, so most likely a bid would come in higher if they have to come back with their equipment. They have the excavation equipment out there right now, which is good for this bid, but honestly, I'm guessing that once they remove and they're off-site, we would need to get another quote from them.
Yeah, I would say if it's gonna be in the spring versus the fall, we'd probably wanna just double check, and you may have, maybe additional $5,000 for mobilization costs, relative to trucking equipment in, would be my rough number.
Right, so to be clear, either we need to move forward, in my opinion, we either need to move forward with removing the spot because of the concerns we have, or we need to figure out a way to clean all that up and not have it recur. I mean, so doing nothing really isn't an option. So we need to do something. So, I would just encourage, whatever we do, it's not nothing.
And
I will say Iron Hustlers left their equipment at Lombard months after they finished. We didn't charge them rent.
Mrs. Graves
Right?
probably can speak to what this arose, the safety and security issue that
Sure.
is really the
Yeah,
point of
well,
all
we were
this.
visiting families over at Cedar Creek. It was brought to our attention that the prairie plot is actually more than meets the eye. As you walk through it, they have hollowed out rooms and paths throughout the prairie plot. Although we've disposed of most of the concerning items that we found within there, at the time there were backpacks and mattresses and furniture, toys, food wrappers, blankets. And so that rose the question, who is using this space? Why are they using it? When are they using it? And it is our property. And so it's concerning that things could potentially be happening within that space. And then additionally, with the need for enhanced school security, we think it's vitally important that we have a clear view of our entire property line, which we don't have currently. It would be impossible for us to see if there was unauthorized individuals within that prairie plot, as it is over your head. And you can walk throughout the paths within the prairie plot for quite some time. Student safety, of course, is our #1 priority, and I, of course, respect Mrs. Green's expertise and viewpoint, and I appreciate her passion, but I do worry about sacrificing student safety right now to preserve the prairie plot. There's been very little maintenance or educational interaction with the plot. Every 2 years, Kiwanis Club does come with a permit for us to sign for the Galesburg Fire Department to burn it down, but as far as it currently being used for educational purposes, it hasn't been much. However, just talking with the school staff, we are curious about and open to discussing the seed collection. You know, what we could do to help with that, or if that was when that could happen, how long it would take, as well as loving the idea of a community garden or pumpkins or other opportunities for that agricultural aspect that didn't block our view of the property. And then we also wanted to reach out to those same people that we do have a reading garden space that we put some money into, having benches and things like that on the east side of our building, and we would welcome support in planting and maintaining some living growth there. Ms. Ham and I have also discussed the outdoor science area and some exploration within our courtyard when the new building is done, so maybe having some exploration that's more contained. So we're just really, right now, we were concerned with what we found within the current plot, and we don't want our students, you know, at risk back there.
Courtyard's not gonna get much sun, remember?
No.
It's not very wide.
Well, my opinion is, I appreciate all the comments. I'm not prepared to vote for this tonight unless we are willing to let them collect seeds and look at how we can have future. We gotta remember, like they said, once you lose this, you don't get it back. And we don't make any more earth anymore, we keep losing it. So, I'm not gonna vote for this unless we have a plan of how we can collect seeds and have something stay there.
See, I'm not so sure the location of a prairie plot has to be there either, though. I mean, we mow a whole lot of space in front of the school that could be turned into something more interesting. It doesn't have to always be behind the location. It can be an area we're proud of and put up front.
Well, I kind of agree with the Steele principle in that I think it's important that we put student safety first. And if there are concerns there, I think that should be addressed. I do appreciate the need for having the wildlife safe spaces and whatnot. But I think that's something that once we make our property safe for children, then that's, I think it'd be important for us to plant, whether it's pumpkin plots or butterfly gardens or prairie grass. I think it's important for us to have that at all of our schools, not just Steele. I driving by Silas and I was kind of wondering, what kind of agricultural opportunities do we have to show children there? We really don't have that there, and we have a great opportunity to do something similar with the King construction as well, where we can, elicit help from community members to create some learning opportunities for our students. But above and beyond, I think we need to put student safety first, particularly at the elementary level, where these kids are small. And again, that prairie grass, it's tall. If you put a grade schooler out there, you won't be able to see them. So that's just my 2 cents.
Lee, how long is Iron Hustlers going to be on site? Would you anticipate? I know they're a little behind schedule with the weather.
Yeah, I think they'll be on site for the next few months, and then with the big equipment, and then the majority of the earthwork will be done. Let me get the next. They'll be doing most of the grading this fall, and then we'll have to have them back to do some backfill next spring, because that's when the parking lot goes in. So there'll be some work they do next spring as well.
So they would be available if we said for 30 days for seed collection, that it's not going to change our bid, or they're not going to?
No, I don't think that would change the bid.
The scope of their work can be done in the winter as well.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
as long as it's not super hard freeze.
Right.
So can we table this till the next meeting?
Well, I guess what I'm hearing though, if our concern is the seed if we're in agreement that the space can be changed, we can vote on it, but the excavating company could delay their work for 45 days, probably wouldn't be a
Until the seed
problem.
collection's done.
We could still leave
Would
the
45 days be sufficient?
I can check with him, but I don't.
No, I think he was.
I was asking Mrs. Brady.
Rhonda,
Well, there's actually a group that would propose collecting seeds
Uh-huh.
and immediately doing a fall burn, which totally takes down the prairie grass this fall.
Okay.
And that could be done within the next 40 days, easily. So your safety issue, yes, there's still bed spring out there. All of the paths are new paths. They are not something that's been there all year long. Because you can walk through there and see the plants that are depressed because of the walking. They're all tall plants. It's been within probably the last 6 to 8 weeks that people have been back there.
the scope of this work does include the removal of the trees as well.
Yes, and there in the trees, you've got a lot more folks that have been there for a long time.
Yeah.
But in the prairie plot itself, that stuff has only been within the last 8 weeks. Otherwise, you would not have the plants laying on the ground that you have. They're too tall.
Is there plants that we could plant that would be shorter at their
Absolutely.
maturity level so that we don't
Absolutely.
have?
It's a management thing.
Okay.
It's strictly a management thing. I would love to see broad walkways mowed through it and have sections divided that each grade could kind of adopt a section. And if the kids wanted to plant pumpkins, then when they were first graders, they'd be able to harvest them. Same thing for other grades. You could kind of emphasize their educational curriculum with walk, because it's a big space.
Well, and most of the cost of this is the tree removal, right? I mean, that's the bigger concern, really. is
Right,
the-
and that's in your depressed part, that's in your low spot, that's where your flood problem could happen.
Right, right.
Yeah, the trees are in the depression of the whole field.
Would it be fair to, this isn't fair, so I'm just not being fair. Would marsh plants do some of the same work that the trees did?
They could, they absolutely could, there could be a rain garden in there,
Right.
absolutely. You
Right.
could have stuff, and again, you could have pass through it, so it's not a big uncumbersome, allowing a safety issue. You could have much more visibility and have smaller plots. Yeah.
So, from my perspective anyway, we can manage the prairie plot itself a lot easier. I mean, that's a burn, that's a mow, that's a whatever. It's the trees that are the big problem. I mean, there's,
Have you walked through?
yeah,
For some reason, there's paint spots on a lot of trees. And as I looked, it almost looked like it was a game somebody set up.
quite possibly, yeah, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, the trees are the bigger concern.
No.
Because there's some established
You've got some very diverse
residences there. I don't know.
trees that you don't have
Yeah.
any other place on any other school properties. You've got a beautiful chestnut tree there that's doing fantastic. And I haven't seen a chestnut tree on any other school property. You've got a nice size sycamore. But again, you don't have that diversity anyplace else. There's diversity of people, but we want the kids to understand there's diversity of plants as well.
Right.
I'm not in a position to make a move on this tonight. There's too much, I'm just sensing there's too many things unanswered that I need more answers on that we can do.
I don't want to lose an environmental location on our school property either, but I also, I mean, it's not just mattresses and backpacks, folks. There have been syringes and things, right? So, because the area has overgrown in the way that prairie plots do, it is an area where people can go to do things that they aren't going to do in public. So I agree, Member Phelps, that I don't know that I'm ready to make a decision tonight, but I think that I do think there has to be a compromise of some kind made, whether we're I mean, because while it is there and it is on Steel property, I also don't expect the teachers and the administrators of that building to keep the land up and go out there, you know, during their prep time and check on things, so.
Monitor its use.
Or monitor its use. So if there's not a time crunch, I'm willing to table this, depending on how the rest of the members feel, and work on a plan and possibly vote on, if there's some kind of compromise made, because I'm also concerned about the water runoff, because McClure does get a lot of water, and I don't want to be contributing to that either. But if there's a way for us to come back with some additional information next month on a way that we can figure out something, especially if iron hustlers are still gonna be there.
I believe the water runoff issue's been addressed by civil. And so as part of, you know, adding new parking lots and kind of changing the back area where we're adding a hard surface playground, we're building the addition, that civil has looked at that, but we can double check. But there's a dry retention area that's part of the civil engineer's work that's been done. Would that be a fair statement?
There's definitely more detention that's been added to the site because there's more impervious pavement and building being added. It's all about addressing whether it's gonna address the back half and whether I without looking at a topo, I don't know where it slopes, but I know the additional detention is located on the west side, where the new parking lot drop off is going.
I think the concerns can be addressed during the time frame before they start work, and I think I made the motion here.
Rod,
did.
you seconded.
A second. I'm comfortable with voting today, with the caveat that we'll have time to get whatever collections they want for this stuff that's removed.
I agree with Laura's statement.
Okay, if the motion is not amended, we'll go ahead and we'll vote on the motion as is, understanding that Member Sherby, would you like to possibly amend your motion to say removal with
Within 45 days of.
with enough time for seed removal?
Seed collection.
Madam President, I'm still not clear as to what we are voting on right now.
So right now, we're voting to remove the plot, the prairie plot behind Steele Elementary School. And what we're discussing right now is to the concerns that were presented during open comment at the beginning of the meeting, whether or not at the very minimum we can do some seed collection to ensure that the wildlife, prairie life that's currently growing, we're able to salvage that and either place it somewhere else on Steele's property or not replot that land, but like reconfigure the plot that's currently being used.
And how large is this plot?
2 acres? Smaller than that?
It's not that big.
Say it's an acre, maybe.
Is the whole thing 12 acres? All of Steele's property?
That's what someone said, I thought it was bigger.
Yeah. I'd say it's probably no more than an acre.
No more than an acre.
It's not as wide as an acre, it might be deep.
And why should it be removed again?
There's some safety concerns from the building with some illegal activities that go on there. We don't have an ability to really supervise that area. We don't know what's really going on there. It's really close to the building. And there's just some pretty strong concerns with some things that have been found, not just in the prairie plot, but in the grove of trees to the east of that, which is what we're talking about removing.
Have the police ever been called into that area?
Oh, sure, yeah.
For what?
Well, trying to find students is usually we're trying to locate people.
There were some drug paraphernalia items found, from my understanding. A noose was hanging from a tree. Some pretty serious items.
Don't you find that that's very concerning?
Mhm.
I don't know.
I'll suspend rules, Rhonda.
Thanks.
And she did left off that she was a 4-H leader too.
Yeah.
You didn't include that.
Boy Scouts, I didn't put that in. There is a new fence enclosing the construction, but it excludes this plot, the trees, and grass. So to someone new to the community, it looks like the school property ends at the fence, and that the prairie and the trees and the other grass belongs to the housing authority. I don't know why, but I'm wondering, couldn't that fence be moved to include all of the property that Steele has?
More money.
But that's the decision we're making as we look at security of all buildings, how we're gonna fence them and what gets included. But if I can just talk 1 minute on the prairie issues. You know, I've spoken in this table that in our last 2 construction projects, 3, the district's taking district responsibility to fund playgrounds at schools, which is different from the days when chocolate bars were funding those things.
Right.
It can very well be that we move toward a district responsibility to have ecological diversity on all of our schools, and we take that on as a district responsibility, not the local school deciding it's something they want to do. You know, when those teachers leave, it falls apart. That's something we have to think about as a policy for the district. And yes, if all the schools had something at some point, and we make sure that that continues. So I would hope if we do move to remove that space, we look upon the responsibility in all of our buildings to have plant diversity represented for our children as a district responsibility.
And then I think the board's also gonna have to consider hiring an individual, because just as we've talked about landscaping issues, you know, we currently don't have the staff on our maintenance and custodial staff to handle a large amount of gardening, a large amount of maintenance of kind of diverse things, and we can't, unfortunately, you know, mandate that in anybody in the building. So there really, if this is a commitment, then we're going to need to commit resources to having a person who can manage all of this, because right now our staff couldn't handle that.
We hire extra staff in the summers to mow.
And lawn reduction's a wonderful thing by putting in prairies. I'm a firm believer in lawn reduction.
Have the teachers or the principals said anything about this subject?
That's Jennifer's
This is the principal right here, Mrs. Graves.
Wave, Jenny. There you go.
What do you feel? How would you want us to vote?
I would like us to give them time to do a seed collection so that the species can continue elsewhere, but I feel very strongly that it's dangerous for our students to be able to access that area, as well as people who are unauthorized to be on our campus can be in there and we don't even know they're there. We can't see that they're there while students are on the playground at recess or playing on the soccer fields nearby. It's very concerning to me. We feel an obligation now that we know what's back there to feel like we have to police it a little bit more, which isn't really fair to the teachers either, that we're asking them to go back and check on that space.
So you feel this is a safety, a major safety concern
I do.
for your school?
I just want to emphasize again, as Lauren mentioned, yeah, I wore all those hats, but I've got an organization that's willing to assist Steele with this, assist the district to keep the environmental diversity there within a safety effort. And if it is identified as school property by moving the fence, that might be something that needs to happen too.
Have you talked to each other about this project?
Roxanne and I have spoken about it, yes.
And?
And I agree in preserving the seeds and collecting those. However, I feel very strongly that we have to be able to see our entire campus to be able to keep the kids safe. That fence was new last year, we just put it up, last fall, and that was the first time Steele had ever had a fence to delineate property at all. And the kids, I can tell you from kindergarten on, can climb that thing in about 2 seconds. They're out in the field and over the fence before I can even manage to get there. So I don't think that a fence is going to deter people from finding their way into that area.
But my thought was to modify it, radically cut it apart, make it much smaller, make the plants lower, make big mowing paths, make it safe. That is the #1 priority. My second priority would be maintain something and make it a learning environment for kids. It is not a learning environment for kids, no way, shape, or form right now. It's crazy bad. But I think there's some room for compromise in keeping bits and pieces without having to replant everything because we want it in a different spot, because that, as Kara pointed out, is very costly.
Board member, I also have to give you background information that Mrs. Green was my teacher when I was a student, and then we taught together, and then I was her principal. So we agree to disagree a lot on lots of things. This is not
How'd
the
you do?
first.
No.
We love each other, it's okay. It's okay.
As a new board member, I would just like to physically walk through that area and come to a conclusion. So right now, I'm going to abstain because I don't feel I have enough knowledge about the subject.
How do you feel?
All right. Member Sherby, do you remember your motion?
Yes, the motion was to approve the bid from Iron Hustlers to cut and remove the trees and grind the stumps, mow the prairie grass, till the site, and grade and prep for seeding done by others. As well as the modification to the motion to allow the time needed to collect seeds from the prairie plot, up to 45 days.
Maureen, you seconded.
I accept.
Okay, so the motion has been amended to make sure that there is a seed collection period prior to plot removal. So we'll move forward with that motion. Allison?
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
No.
Sherpy?
Yes.
Cervantes?
I wasn't ready for the vote. There's not enough board members at the table. Yes.
Hannigan?
Abstain.
So, in the first time on my, as a member seated at this table, we had a vote of 3-1-1. So it will move forward. I do want to see some collaboration of some kind, and I do want there to be a double check on that water runoff thing. I'm not,
We have a meeting this
ecological,
week.
like, nomenclature is not mine and my brain's not working, but want to ensure all of that, please.
We have a meeting this week with our civil engineers, so we can bring that up.
Okay.
I would like to, as a board member, know before anything's done there, what's going on.
We have an
Status report.
update prior to,
Yeah.
Well, 45 days would be, we have another meeting prior to that deadline, so they should be able to bring something to us in November. That's what you're asking for, right?
Okay, so next we have discussion regarding the GHS construction. Dr. Asplin?
Thank you. You wanna say that?
Can we take a break for 5 minutes, and we have a lot of agenda ahead of us. Madam President?
Yes.
Thank you.
We can take a 5-minute break. That way, if people would like to vacate, they can. Man, I don't get to use it anymore, because we start, and there you go. That's how long we've been here, folks.
So I got a lot.
Okay, so I'm just making a note on my notes that we took a break at 8:54, and now we're coming back at 9:04 to start the discussion regarding the GHS construction. Dr. Aslan.
Thank you. Allison, are you going to manipulate the slides there? So what you're going to see here is we worked with Leggett and Russell over the last several days, today being the vetting day where we got everything checked out to make sure we were right on target. So that's why you didn't see it in your packet before. Essentially what we're talking about here is, do we want to completely vacate the high school, or do we want to do it in stages? So before we put an inordinate amount of time into starting to plan that, we thought we better just give you an overview, and then you would give us your thoughts as to which one we should pursue more vigorously. And so what we have here is basically an overview of what that would look like. Go to the next slide. Okay, so what you see there is option one. I don't love the title of one-year option because it presumes we're going to get everything done in a year, and I don't want to overpromise that because that may not happen. More aggressive option, how about that? And so it says vacate the high school during the 2020-2021 school year to allow for the completion of all construction if possible. The high school would use Gale, Rose Hope, and Welch, Whitehall, and 4 modular classroom units, and those modular units have 10 classrooms per unit, so that's 40 modular spaces. Whitehall gym would be used as a cafeteria, and Thiel gym would remain open for volleyball, basketball, wrestling, and student assemblies.
I have a question.
Yes.
So your one option, what happens to those 4 modular classrooms when you're done with the construction?
So you lease those, and then at a certain point in time, you ask if you need an extension or not. So we're really not in danger of, we sign a year lease, but then if we need more, we can get it for longer. And then the 2-year option.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Currently, how many rooms are we utilizing at the current Galesburg High School building? I'm sorry, that wasn't a trick question.
I want to say 67, does that sound right?
Yeah, there's roughly 41 general ed classrooms, social studies, math, English, business, and then your both.
And
With special ed,
PE, special ed, specialized classes, yeah.
in Gale, we would gain 18 classrooms.
Correct, and then we have some other spaces that we're factoring into this. Like for instance, like there's portions of the library, there's the music room that could be repurposed. The cafeteria at Gale wouldn't need to be used as a cafeteria. Same way with the,
It says here we use Whitehall as cafeteria.
Right, because
Right.
the Gale cafeteria is not big enough.
right, so we wouldn't be using it as a cafeteria.
Oh, okay, we would not be.
Right,
Okay.
like that would be the
Repurposing
location
it.
for band, because we
Okay.
need a larger area for that. So it's not just 18 classrooms, because we can repurpose more of Gale and also Rose Hope and then it's
Which
current.
has 6 classrooms
Right.
and a gym.
Correct. And that
Okay.
gym would be used for art. So 2-year option, portions of the high school would be closed through phasing. 3 modular units would be utilized, so we'd only be down 1 set of 10. And then Whitehall gym would be used for cafeteria for at least 1 year, and possibly into year 2. And then access to field during 2 construction years, and phasing of the mechanical and locker room renovations will occur during this time period. So go on to the next slide so we can start to see what that kind of looks like. The 10 classroom unit, you can see a rough overview of what that looks like. So it has a hallway in between classrooms on each side. It's air conditioned, whiteboards, Wi-Fi capabilities, bathrooms in each unit. So quite honestly, for a lot of our high school teachers, and I'm looking at Lori specifically, it'd be better than what she has now. So we'll just get her one now. You know? Yeah, so, I mean, and Mandy's back to, yeah, so both of you could be in the same pod and you'd be like, hey, this is great. So you can see there, that's the external view of something that would be similar to what we're talking about. We would be responsible for constructing the overhead, so when it's inclement weather, students wouldn't have to walk, get rained on. As much as possible. I mean, we're not, you're going to be walking to Gale and to Wyckoff. I mean, you're gonna be out in the open weather. I mean, it's going to happen.
But students do that now.
They do it now.
Every day on their way.
Right.
Do these include lockers? All
So,
lockers?
no, so this is a view of
No.
inside one of the modular units. So each classroom has whiteboards, tack boards, a closet for storage. This is just another view. There's windows in each unit. They're about 650 square feet. Each building has a male and female bathroom. There are hooks, so that's one of the things. We have lots of things that we would need to work through. One of them is how we're going to deal with no lockers in essence for a year if it's the 1 year phasing. And even with the 2, there will be areas where the lockers are that won't be accessible for periods of time, so.
Yeah, it'll be difficult in the 2-year part to assign lockers to students because they might have the area accessible for a month and then it's not accessible the next month. And so, in both options, there's gonna be locker issues. There just are. So if you go to option 1, costs, you wanna go to that? If you look at the cost of that, you've got the 4 modular classroom units. The 12-month lease is $502,000, almost $503,000. Just delivery of it's $152,000. The installation, which means the electrical, sewer, water, covered walkway, is about $300,000. The foundation system, Lee, do you want to explain what that foundation system is?
That was from the vendor, wasn't it, for this one?
Right, so Russell wouldn't be responsible for this, so we're looking at putting the 4 modular units on the runway, the drive in the back, that comes off of Dayton, in that area, and we're stacking them in a row, and then creating the covered walkway that then would give access to Rosehoben and to Gale at that point. Because that concrete is so thick, because it used to be literally an airport runway, there
Things are
are
smaller though.
modular, we don't need to do any borings, we don't need to do any permanent kind of setting of the structures. There's actually large square pieces that kind of look like puzzle pieces that they literally anchor into the ground with large bolts. And then that's the temporary foundation that sits on there.
Right.
So we didn't have to bore, we didn't have to pour any footings because of the location of where we're going to put them, which saved us money in the long run. And I wanted to point out there's an asterisk next to some of these costs because these are not to exceed costs. So they could be less than this, but this is just the initial estimate from Modular Innovations.
So you can see there, we've got the foundation system at $220,000, steps, decking, and ramps not to exceed $60,000, general conditions, meaning not to exceed $60,000, permits and engineering, $25,000, additional items like gators, security. So we talked about having mobile, like gators or Polaris vehicles or whatever for our security to drive around basically as a perimeter to make sure that we had
Segway.
Paul Blart Mall Cop, sure, on that. So for a total price for the aggressive plan of $1,344,675.
And this is over and above, or part of what the renovation's gonna cost.
It would be part of the overall $36 million that are available to redo DHS.
And none of this is recoupable. So this is money spent that's gone.
That is, yes, that's true.
Can I ask a question about the buildings themselves? My first three years teaching were mobile classrooms, and I always had pipes freezing up. The skirting here is well insulated, and we've had some cold winters.
I know Brian's used them in other locations, we've never used them, so I can't speak to that, but I don't know if this is a concern that.
Yeah, with this, we've used this company before in the past, and we've not had any problems with that. There has been problems I've heard of in the past with pipes freezing.
This was a long time ago.
Yeah, no, but they do insulate around the skirting now to keep that temperature at a warmer climate than what it would be on the outside. So you shouldn't have issues with that.
And also the one pipe, you typically run heat trace on these type of temporary classrooms as well, which is an electronic element that you put underneath. So similar to construction trailers, when we set those up, I want to do the same thing.
Okay.
And then in the screen you see up there now, option 2 costs. I'm not gonna go through the breakdown because it's basically the same breakdown except for an exception, a couple of exceptions. So everything's a little bit cheaper because you have 3 modular classroom units instead of 4. However, at the bottom, leaving Churchill open another year would cost an additional $859,000.
Question?
Yes, sir.
3 modulars is 753,
two
and
years.
4 is 503.
That's 2
2
years.
years.
For 24 months.
Yeah, so it's a longer term.
Thank you.
But thank you for pointing that out. So yeah, so it's not apples to apples, it's apples to oranges. So that's a 2-year cost versus a 1-year cost on the other side. And so it would be obviously more of those units, but then also the additional cost of keeping Churchill open. So it's actually more expensive if we use the second option, $2,357,000. So you see that the next summary sheet, option 1 is going to cost 1.34 million. Option 2 is going to cost 2.36 million, 3.5 million, for a difference of $1 million. Now, option 2 cost does not include inflation costs of labor and materials in year 2 of 3 to 5%. For example, if 50% of the project is completed in year 2, it will cost 3 to 5% more than in year 1. We did not feel that was fair to put in because there's really no way to put hard numbers to that. But it will be more expensive on the bidding part to do it over 2 years than to do it over 1. Now, once again, we need to be careful with how we word this, because saying 1 year, it doesn't necessarily mean 1 year. It means we're going to try to get it done in 1 year. That doesn't necessarily mean we will get it done in 1 year. That's a very key difference. Now, a couple of very important parts of this too, as you see from all of the modular classrooms, we're not going to be able to keep a lot of the high school open, period. And Lee, you jump in wherever I'm not leaving in or not including any really important parts, but when we get into the water pipes, we basically have to rip them all out. Fair?
Fair.
Yeah, and so when we start ripping out water pipes, it's going to be difficult to say, okay, well, we didn't have to worry about the east end, so we're good with those water pipes while we knocked out the west side. Or when we pull out the power, there's going to be problems with that too. So in either scenario, we're trying to empty a lot of the high school because either it's a safety issue for students, a dust issue for students, electrical, sewer, water, gas, all of those problems exist by keeping students in the building. And one of the speakers asked why we could, all these other buildings were built. While we did this, the problem with the high school is the problems are so pervasive. If it was just the west side, that would be one thing. It's the whole building. We have wiring problems, we have water problems, and they're mandatory fixes. They're not things we can opt not to do. And so when we start getting into a lot of these places, the water pipes are in the walls. So it's not like you can just go and get the water pipes out. You got to get the walls out first. And those just aren't going to be much like the talk we had about steel. It's a safety issue. And we really can't have students around a lot of those. So we tried to put together on this sheet you see up on the screen now, pros and cons of option 1 versus option 2. A pro of option 1, a minimum of $1 million of operational construction savings, leaving more money for the project. A con, though, is we don't know the future locations of GADC and GHS North, okay? So in these numbers, we did not include those 2 spots. So it may come to pass that we need to put in some more temporary classrooms. We may need to increase our costs. We'll have to get into that deeper. Fewer distractions from construction and noise pollution. One of the cons is supervision of students between buildings may be more challenging. 3 to 5% savings on labor and materials is obviously good. A con that you really can't put any money to. The class of 2021 will not have any time in GHS, with the exception of games and assemblies and field gym. Potentially, the auditorium could be used for graduation, although that's not going to be 100% promised at this time. Less opportunities for full building service disruptions. Con, instead of 3 mobile units on the 2-year plan, we have to supervise 4 in the annex 2 buildings, and 2 annex buildings, excuse me. So there's just more unknown.
So Gale will be closed by then, so there's a lot of dominoes.
If we go through the yes, thank you, Member Phelps. So if we go through the 1-year plan, and once again, the aggressive plan, then Gale will be closed at the end of that year. Yes, we would not be using it either. And other than what we decide to use of it in the future, or what our plans are, because we have nothing concrete yet. And then if the aggressive plan were done and done well, and it was all timely and weathered good and all that stuff, our 7 through 12 students would move in the fall of 2021. But it could come to pass that they move in the winter of 2021, or, it's just, there's still a lot of we don't knows, because we're gonna get into a lot of this project and find something we didn't know we were gonna find.
Right, so I want to take a minute to pause because I want to remind our gallery and our friends in media land, both present and via YouTube later recording. This is not a renovation that we're doing for giggles. We're actually taking this project on to remind everybody because of health, life, safety, right? So that was the precipice for all of this. So we have to fix the things that assessment has said need to be fixed in order to provide safe educational atmosphere for our students. We're using it as an opportunity to also enhance, where we can, the educational facilities so that all of our students have an equitable learning environment across our district. So that's point one. Point two, anyone who has ever done a home renovation, ever, as small as it's been, knows that you never know what's going to happen until you actually knock down a wall. So I appreciate that Dr. Asplund not saying this is a year one plan. It's the more aggressive of the plans, because GHS has not been muddled with the exception of the science wing, since it was built.
And the library wing.
Right, well, yes, so library and science. But the core of the building has not been muddled with. So we don't know actually what's behind there. So aggressive plan is a more apt term than we're gonna get this done in a year. Because no home renovation really ever goes according to plan 100%. So I just wanna put that out there before somebody comes back in a year and says, you said this was gonna be done and you promised us. We never promised that.
How do you propose using the main competition gym during this period if we're tearing everything up? Because I think you'll still need water and power in those spaces, and we're gonna have porta potties outside them. I'm really serious about this.
No, we're actually not going to touch the locker rooms until the following summer. So even though locker rooms desperately need renovation, so that we can keep Thiel open and keep it available for student assemblies and for our games and wrestling and things of that nature, we're gonna actually do that then in the summer of 2021?
Well, the spring and summer.
Spring and summer, once basketball season's over.
But will that delimit the options that Brian has in terms of developing the access to the school, if we have to keep that entrance dedicated to a gym?
It may be that you enter that from where like the wrestling room is. It may not be a great experience entering the gym.
Okay,
but it's
so we're not
still-
gonna delimit our options.
Right. So what we talked about during the phasing of, because that was a concern about field gym and locker rooms, is we can work within that confined area of keeping that space open because there's exterior access points. It's, relatively close to Whitehall. And whether we have to do something temporary to keep conditioning in the area. One of the things that Dr. Asplund didn't mention, the high school is still on steam heat, which is not, we don't put steam heat in anything anymore. It's, not, so in the process, we're gonna be switching over the whole mechanical system and heating and cooling system in the whole building, which means that if we are going to run a phase option, we have to keep the boiler system open and running while we're installing another mechanical system side by side, which can be done. It is done,
Expensive.
but it's tricky, right? Because, now you have to keep two pipe systems up and going at the same time. What this will allow us to do is actually take that system offline. We'll temporary condition the space as needed. Make sure that the old gym is conditioned as needed as well for those spaces. But, limiting the access to just the gym and locker room space is a lot more feasible for us.
And just in case people out there couldn't hear, because I've gotten this question from the staff every time I've gotten to speak to the staff, you said heating and cooling.
Yes.
Okay, I'm using a microphone on purpose, heating and cooling. And I don't blame the staff for asking, but that's an important item to mention. But it's also really important that a lot of our meeting today was talking about how do we make sure we stage this so that we can have access to that, because we do feel like those are important things for our students to be able to have their experiences in the gyms like they've had before. And as much as we'd like to have the building open all year and then work on it in the summer, that's just not feasible, unless we wanted this to take like 9 summers. I mean, it's just not enough. There's not enough time.
The modular classrooms look really nice for traditional classrooms. You know, probably, like, as you mentioned, probably
Right.
nicer than some of our classrooms now. But what about some of our untraditional, like band, art, shop, special ed classes?
Right, so we have, they won't be ideal, but the band would be in the Gale gym, and the art would be in the Rose Hogan Welch gym. We have been trying to figure out what to do with wood shop, auto shop, and that's one of the things that's left to be determined. We don't know.
Okay.
So we're trying to get a better answer.
What about theater? Would they still be able to use the auditorium to do their theater productions, or do we need to like?
The little theater would
outsource?
not be able to be used, so
I'm
we'll have
talking
to.
about the big theater.
The big theater, it'll depend on power and water and a lot of those other issues, so that's TBD at this
And
point.
we may have enough money to do something in that space. My hope, so maybe some remodeling going on in there.
Just so you know, if we want to remodel that space as is,
I didn't say as is.
I'm just saying, if that's what we want, it's gonna cost us probably about $12 million.
I didn't say as is.
Ms. Hamel, find that for us.
Cool.
I wish I could.
Never mind, problem solved.
Another question I have is concerning the cafeteria. How's that gonna fit into this?
The cafeteria would be in Whitehall Gym for a year.
Okay.
And then the kitchen, of course, we're gonna hope to bid on that 2 months from now. Have the
And it'll be
bids
completed next
approved.
summer.
And the kitchen will be worked on over this summer. And that's really a linchpin to this whole thing. It has to be ready to go next year. But the cafeteria won't be available because the new kitchen, it will take the footprint of the current kitchen and the current cafeteria. So we have to add on a new cafeteria.
Right, because the kitchen impacts the entire district.
Exactly.
It's more
Yeah,
just the
yeah, it's more than just the high school. That's an every student issue.
Another concern I have is this is gonna be a huge impact for teachers.
Absolutely.
I know what it's like to move a teacher from one classroom to another and doing that multiple times.
Well, and we see this on here, the next to the last bullet point, Member Sherpy, that we felt like option 1 was the better for the teachers because they're only gonna move one time. Well, 2, but I mean, you know, they're gonna move in and move out.
Did Bob just volunteer to move everyone though?
Rob?
I wouldn't be surprised.
I see one person back
Yes,
there
a
that
little
looks
truck.
pretty hopeful. We would not like, we would want for the teachers to be able to move into their temporary space and know that that's where they're gonna be until the permanent space is ready. Not go, okay, you're gonna move here, okay, now you're gonna move here, okay, now you're gonna move here. Now we feel like that would be more disruptive than just moving one time.
And confusing for the students because, you know, Q1, your classes are here, but all of a sudden that wing's closed. So where did Mrs. Aiden go?
Right.
You know, it's kind of a where's Waldo for some of our staff.
I will mention to you that the Lombard will be done next year, and we are making modifications to that auditorium as well. So there's some program space that, you know, for, I heard some concern on the theater.
Yeah, we could use that for the fall play, since they don't use.
And it'll be
regular
expanded,
staff.
it's an expanded stage,
Yeah.
and we still would have Churchill, even though it's not ideal. But we do have Churchill, the seats almost 1,000 in Churchill that year.
I know that there's lots of logistical things with this. What about your administrators' offices and library and?
Backseat of the car.
Actually, we have that figured out.
Okay.
So with our current administrative staff, we have enough administrators and deans to have one located in each of the modular units and in each of the buildings. So that if there's any problem, the teachers have a concern, they're going to have an administrator or dean available to them within there.
I'm gonna suspend rules for just a moment. Ms. Satan, I saw that you had your hand up.
Well, I wondered if the
construction gentleman could give kind of a broad stroke for what it would feel like from a teacher standpoint, comparing the multi-year, 2-year, compared to the more aggressive. And Dr. Asplund kind of started that with, that I might, in quarter 1, my room might be just where it is currently. And then quarter 2, maybe I'm in a modular over wherever, and then I get to come back to my place because you fixed it. Or I'm interested in just a broad stroke about how that would feel compared to the 1 year that you explained. That might help us just kind of understand the time frame.
Absolutely. So with the more aggressive option, like Dr. Asplund said, we would, at the end of the school year, vacate the school, probably set up the modular classrooms relative to be able to move in that time frame over the summer. When school starts, you'd be in those, whatever that space would be, whether modular classrooms or Gale or Roosevelt, and you'd stay there until the class finished, and then move into the new space. From the other one where we are being renovating during construction, we would chunk off chunks of the building and say, okay, this is phase A, and we vacate that area, remodel it in the quickest amount of time we can, and then turn that over and take another chunk, and just kind of chunk through the building and have to work with administration to see how the space gets moved around. With the design not being finalized, I don't know where all the spaces go, and some people may be moving from second floor to first, or first to second, or from second to an addition that's not built yet. So there may be more of that moving around different areas, because maybe we renovated this wing, but your new space is in the addition that's still under construction. So that, I don't know if that kind of helps you understand there. In not knowing the final design, I can't tell you this is where we start to work the building. We try to be as thoughtful as we can, knowing we're kind of working out from the center core of running mechanical piping and trying to figure that out as well. The other thing that happens a lot in these renovations is we try to take advantage of breaks, and if need be, work nights. So you may be working in the classroom, and you may have to have someone come in over, Christmas break, and they're going to rip your ceiling down and try to get put back before break staff back. Hopefully it is backing up. If not, maybe just lights are in, ceiling tile's not in, to try to get mechanical. We've had other additions where we go through and take all the ceilings out so we can work above, and then, try to work within the teachers, but, make sure the lights are in, but you may not have ceiling tiles, so noise can be a concern at times as well. So again, it's not that it's not doable, but as if anybody that's gone through a renovation, there's a little bit of pain involved with working through and living through renovation. So that was part of the concern and part of the reason to come up with the modular classroom option, to try to alleviate those concerns.
What about parking and busing?
So parking won't really be different than what it is now, except we'll have to work out, obviously, drop off and pick up. That would be a huge, big difference on this one too. Probably something we should have put in the con. Is that we'll have to figure out where parents would come to request their student, and for us to come back, because we ideally would close off Dayton Street right there, and then we'd have a fence basically around the perimeter. The whole student lot would still be open. The teacher lot would depend on the time of year when that would be open or not on the east side. And then the parking over by the field house should be open for the most part. You'll have to go back behind the football field to get to it under this scenario. But really, I think under either scenario, we're probably going to have to go that way, just because we're going to have those modular classrooms. We're going to have to use Gale. We're going to have to use Wyckoff. So we're going to have to close off that area to traffic one way or the other.
Will the baseball, softball fields be accessible, or?
They would be from the west side. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts, but so we currently, and this is probably gonna have to be reworked, I would imagine, Mrs. Ham. Anyway, we currently have agreements with the city and the why, correct, for use of our gym spaces. I imagine some of that's gonna have to
With the closure.
be rethumbed.
Right.
Mhm.
So with the closure of our two buildings, we're gonna have to rework both those intergovernmental agreements. But we would still have the use of the two gyms at Lombard, Churchill, depending on what happens with Nielsen. We could potentially use Nielsen Gym for a year if it's, the property isn't sold or is usable. And then we'll also have two gyms available at King, which we currently only have one. So it'll just be kind of a shift of where those open gym spaces are currently.
So board members, the central office is looking for direction.
Yeah, do we want to be really aggressive, or do we want to take a more measured approach, knowing we don't know a lot? These are projections. But we're trying to put out what we believe the major issues would be if we choose one path versus another.
Looking at the numbers and knowing how difficult it was for the Lombard renovation when they kept cycling through the gym, which was broken up into classrooms that didn't have ceilings on them. And so once again, thank you all Lombard staff who went through that 2-year period. But I think there's a more aggressive plan is superior in too many ways not to opt that direction.
Just a moment, to suspend rules again, Ms. Downing.
Quick question. On the more aggressive option 1, it was listed on there that was for 12 months for rental. So let's say it took 24 months or something in between. Is that cost double essentially? If it took 24 months versus 12 months for all of those items strictly for 12 months. So if you make them both 24 months, just to make them apples to apples, even though that's probably not necessarily the case based on more aggressive, less aggressive. But would that cost be doubled if it took 24 months for option 1?
Well, that cost is double in option 2. So
Well, yes,
that's what
yes.
It is.
Yes, in essence.
No,
And
because
plus
the
you'd have to
construction
know-
and the movement fees are just the rental fee.
Well, no,
would
just
be double.
the cost that we listed up there, we would need to double those effectively, plus we'd have to add back in the Churchill staying open for another year, and yes, there would be a lot of other costs.
So then that would make option 1 clearly much more expensive than option 2 if you give them both 24
Well,
24
if you
months.
gave them both 24 months, correct. However, if option 1's gonna take 24 months and option 2 is probably gonna take 48.
Right.
So then you gotta take those and take those times 2, so.
No, the only figure that would be duplicated would be the leases, which is which is $500,000, because we're not doing this foundation or the delivery twice, or the steps twice, it's just the rental piece. Even if we had to lease those for additional year, we're still ahead $600,000.
It would be roughly $41,000 a month
Rental.
for each expanded lease month for the rentals.
So, question to Russell.
Yes.
How much fudge factor do you figure? So we're pipe dreaming on a year. So what's your fudge factor that you feel it's gonna take to do that? If we go the aggressive route, what's a realistic months to get that done?
Again, not knowing what the design is, we're kind of speculating based on
Sure.
square footage and everything, so a year is aggressive, not gonna lie. I would recommend that, option, if need be, to expand to Christmas. That could be an option. One thing that we could always look at is on that aggressive schedule, making sure the 7-8 portion of the building's ready by August, either way. And if there's a wing that's still lagging, that you keep a modular unit back or two till Christmas and then move at that break. I know it's never great to move in the middle of a site. You don't want to move in October, November. You always want them either August or December, right? So that would be, I would say, the next logical point would be in another few months.
But December, you might have a foot of snow too.
Okay. And what we've been talking about is trying to look at bid packages to put out earlier to get them ahead of the game, knowing that when school lets out, barring no snow days, that contracts are set and ready for like demo. The demo package is approved and ready, they can be in there from day one to lessen that burden on the back end. Because if we're waiting for contracts and we're missing that window for the 12 months,
Right.
we need to stay ahead of that game to make sure that we hit the ground running for construction.
Well, we're talking about with safety of students and moving. I don't like having students all over the place, but I also know that trying to keep a business open, which we have, and remodel is crazy to think that that'll work. But I have concern on having kids on foot going to Gale and Rose Hope. And I know we go to the field house now, but we got a lot more bodies moving.
No question. I mean, it's gonna be, we're concerned too. I mean, that's why we bring it up.
But I just don't see any way feasible to keep it open and try to remodel. First time you pull the wire, you shut the whole place down. That's disaster.
Well, from a safety perspective too, one thing during remodels, and you can ask this current staff at Lombard and Steel that are going through right now, we start shutting down egress points when we do additions to buildings and reroute emergency evac plans. We've worked through the district to update those maps as we go. The challenge in the high school, it's so massive, and the evac plans are always different, and where do you shelter for tornadoes, or where do you do this for fire drill? And we're changing those egress maps constantly because we're taking over chunks of the building. Where at Lombard and Steel, we're saying, okay, for this next, this whole school year, these two doors don't exist, and they rerouted for this year, and they can train their staff on it. The challenge when you do a constant remodel, those lines shift. So there is, from a safety perspective and keeping contract workers separated from the students. I kind of joke that it's really easy to spot a contractor worker at Steel because they're, twice the height, right? You get to the high school, it's easier for that blending to start to occur, right? There may be a year difference between some of the guys or gals on site doing the work under a hard hat versus the students in the classroom. So there is things that we have to keep in mind as we work in occupied spaces to keep the students safe. So it does lessen that burden for us, so that's a positive.
And Mr. Houston, if you can remind us all how many entry points, egress locations high school has?
20, is it more than 27 or something like that? Terrible.
It's 27.
27.
Wow, that's what I thought.
27 opportunities for someone to enter or leave the building.
We may be cutting that down by doing this.
No, we will be cutting it down significantly.
Part of the goal.
What is this is listed as a discussion item.
Well,
They
because
need to
there's
make the decision.
Well,
on
there's
what they're gonna
there's
do.
nothing to act on. I mean, formally, what we're asking you to do is say, which avenue do you want us to focus on more of our efforts? Because we've been
Because-
dividing our efforts, looking at both. And
Because
it's
if we
just,
say that we want them to focus on the more aggressive, then they're going to start bringing us bids.
then we're gonna tell you about where the GABC is gonna end up. We're gonna tell you where we're gonna do theater. We're gonna tell you all those things. Right now, we're just doing, well, if it's this, we might do this. It's just a lot. We have to start focusing our efforts one direction.
And Brian needs to start programming, so he needs to start meeting with teachers and departments at both the high school and at the junior high to talk about, what their needs are for classroom spaces, and we can't start all of that until we know which path we're gonna go down in terms
Are we
of
taking a
option 1
vote
or 2.
today? or-
No, I'm just
No,
giving them direction.
Giving us direction, I mean.
So what I'm hearing from, I've heard from Member Lyons and I've heard from Member Phelps that your pros are leaning more toward aggressive. Member Sherpy, Member Hunnigan, thoughts?
Yeah, aggressive right now.
I would concur. The first option, it's got the potential to save money. From a safety perspective, I think it's probably more dangerous to do construction simultaneous. Moving is, I'd like to limit the number of times we have to move students and teachers.
I
I'd definitely like to see more details about.
Well, and we can
option
show
one.
you some more, and something we didn't even bring up
Because I've
tonight
got answer
is,
questions.
like, we have the modular units that have science labs in them. So
Okay.
people that at home are sitting out there going, what are they gonna do about science? Well,
Yeah.
we asked that question, so that we could get science mobile, rooms. So, that, you know, we would have science labs available, regardless, either way.
And we have water and sinks in the room, which once again, not ideal because they're not designed and as big as our current lab spaces are. But there's ways around that we can modify, like the rooms at Gale, in order to make them usable for science labs. So, I mean, we have a tentative sketch of where we would put everyone. I guess we needed to do that to even know how many modular units we were going to require, so that's kind of been.
Now we can spend some time giving you a map of, this is what we foresee being in Gale, this is what we foresee being in Rosehoven, this is what the modular, like a aerial view would look like, and this is, you know, so we can spend some time putting that together for next month or the month after that to make sure we have all the details.
And I think one of the other things that, I mean, I can't tell you what to do, but I would highly suggest the high school administration to think about is ways, if this is the path that we're saying that this is likely the path we're gonna move forward, to figure out how in the world we still make this a special senior year for people who are not gonna be in the building. Like what, you know, and maybe it becomes, you know, the biggest joke ever at their 20th reunion, that they, you know, all get t-shirts and say we survived the construction of, you know, whatever. But if there's something that we can do, right, because we have already heard mentioned by one community member at a previous meeting, the ways in which her students' senior year has been disrupted by the changes that we had to make to our calendar in order to do all this. And that's not the business that, you know, we want to be in, is making, you know, the last year of a student's career, you know, memorable because of the things they didn't get to do, rather than how we can try and figure out how to make it the, you know, biggest special mess that they've ever been through. Okay, moving on to the next area, focus area 3, responding to the changing needs of our community. Do I have a motion to consider approval of our audit?
So moved.
Second.
Are there any additional questions from the presentation that we received earlier this evening?
Definitely not.
Allison?
Ellis.
Aye.
Sherpy?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Hannigan?
Yes.
Lyon?
Okay, next, we need to, as a board, appoint a delegate and an alternate to the joint annual conference. So, if you don't mind, Dr. Esplin, I can just talk about it. So every year, we attend a conference in Chicago, and part of that conference is to assign one of our board members to go into basically the IASB's legislative forum to decide as a unit what we're going to support legislatively through Springfield. And so we, you know, there's resolutions that go up that other school boards have submitted, and they think that it is important enough to become some kind of state law. And then we go in as our district and represent ourselves on what way we would consider that vote, if we agree or disagree with that particular statute, policy, law. So, of the members who are attending joint conference, is there someone who would like to volunteer to be the delegate before I, as the president, just say, you're it?
I haven't taken my turn unless Rod wants to do it again.
I don't need to.
You want to do it? Good.
Okay, Mr. Phelps Member Phelps has volunteered to be our delegate. Member Lyons, does that mean you'll be agreeing?
Oh, sure, I'll be an alternate, yeah.
Okay.
You
So-
said that fast enough.
Okay, so every board members, you received from the IASB a packet on the 2019 resolutions. Please review that information and come prepared to share your thoughts about what way you feel District 205 should suggest Member Phelps vote at that.
Discuss that next month.
Correct.
That's on the agenda for next month, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now, next up, we have the differential committee report. Mrs. Ham.
I'm actually going to have Mr. Matthews come up. He gave a wonderful presentation to staff members.
Well, we're not closing anything, so I think that's probably a good thing.
Speak in the microphone.
Yes.
Good.
Okay, so some background information. Back in 2018, the GEA and the board thought it was a good idea to look at our differentials and our stipends. So basically, those are what we pay our coaches, individuals that are in charge of clubs, and those types of things. We needed to kind of look at what we pay to see if there was anything that we needed to change, because they were probably a little underpaid. So we came up with a committee to look at that information. So we had a committee of 7 members: Russ Ulrich, Brett Wolf, Alicia, Ray V, Maury, Rod, Jen, and myself. And we met probably 8 times, something like that, starting last fall, all the way up until this fall. We looked at other schools our size. Western Big Six and the Mid-Illini were the 2 big conferences that I gathered information from. We also needed to look at the IHSA and the IESA rules, regulations on season lengths. We conducted student surveys at the junior highs and the high schools to see what their interests were and things that we were currently doing, maybe some things that we weren't doing. And then we had some staff surveys as well, things that we were offering, things that we weren't offering, things that maybe we used to offer that were cut that maybe they would like to see come back. So some of the concerns we had with our current stipends, really no rhyme or reason to the percentages that are in the contract. None of us on the committee kind of felt, why do we pay what we pay? There really wasn't an answer to that, so we thought that was a concern. Amount of time spent, a sponsor or a coach didn't always correspond to the differential pay. So, for example, if they were putting a lot of time in, maybe they weren't being compensated for that amount of time that they were putting into that activity or sport. Some activities didn't have a differential established. Example, K-5 robotics. There was nothing. You couldn't make or earn anything from doing that activity. And then students identified the desires for different clubs or activities that we didn't offer. And some activities were part of the budget reductions in 2016 that they felt like we needed to bring back. So the hardest part of what we were trying to do, and Mrs. Ham was crucial in trying to figure out how we can come up with a way to compensate people fairly, I guess is the best way to put it. So we were trying to make it so that we could prove to what we were doing. So we came up with a formula, and that formula was created to look at the length of the season or the activity, the time commitment for the coach or sponsor, and that helped us establish a way to compensate them fairly for the amount of time that they were putting forth in their club or extracurricular activity. The new formula, and this is different, we didn't have anything in what we have now, as far as if you were to have success in postseason play or to pay you for the extra time that would go into extra season play. So the new formula kind of helps those individuals pay them for their time going above and beyond that they would normally have in the regular season, I guess is the best way to put it. The proposal creates an annual longevity increase to their weekly amount. So right now, our differential is basically scale 1 and scale 2. Scale 1, I think, is from like 1 to 4 years, and then the other one is 5+ years. So you either fall in one of 2 categories, and that's it. there's no way to increase that. So we felt it was important to be able to put a longevity scale in there that every year that you coach, your weekly salary, for example, would continue to go up. So the longer you coach, there's an incentive, because your pay would go up for a sponsor or for an extracurricular coaching stipend. If anybody has any questions as we go along.
Ask Maury.
Well, he was on the committee, so he better not have any questions.
Stay with you.
Okay, so then, on top of that, we also came up with new clubs or activities, and these were what the students showed interest in. Just example, art club was one that they used to have and they brought back, but that was a huge one that the kids wanted to see come back. Robotics, 5th and 6th grade band, 5th and 6th grade choir, chess club, junior high scholastic bowl, special needs buddies club. So these are just a few that the kids showed interest in, like, we would love for these to come on and be part of what we can offer to them. We did have a couple, I think around 5, that they, based on the old formula on what they were getting paid compared to the new formula, they would actually have, under the new system, a decrease in pay. Well, we're not going to pay anybody less than what they're making now, but those individuals would kind of be hold harmless. So they would stay frozen, and we'll see this as we go through the slide. And as their weekly salary would increase over time, eventually they will come to a point where they meet, and then they would continue to grow. So we just had a couple of those that kind of fell in that gray area of they were going to potentially lose money, but nobody felt like that was fair. We can't do that to anybody.
But if there's a new person going into that, they would they would go to the new formula, right?
That is correct, yes. And then we had a couple outliers that Mrs. Ham was more in tune with, I think, like band and choir and kind of.
We got those on there.
Okay.
Those were figured out. Outliers, like we pay a person for concessions. Like you can't really apply the formula to a concessions person because there isn't really anything. So those are a few that we're gonna just have to negotiate individually with the union when the time comes. So we have a list of those.
Okay, so here, for example, the high school athletic formula. The formula is for head coaching stipends based on a $40,000 base salary. The teams in this would include soccer, tennis, cross country, volleyball, bowling, wrestling, swimming, diving, and golf. So the formula would take 40,000 times 1.1, and you would come up with their weekly salary of $440. We would take that $440 times the length of their regular season. Now, their regular season would also include the first season or the first week of postseason because, for example, high school cross country. Everybody goes to a cross country regional. So in theory, that is still part of their regular season because everybody goes. It's after that first week is when that becomes postseason. So in cross country, after the regional, they go to sectionals, and then they go to state. So they would have 2 weeks of postseason because we don't count the regional because everybody goes to the regional. For swimming, they go to sectionals, and then they go to state. So they only have 1 week of postseason. Every sport has something different. Basketball has regional, sectional, super sectional, state. So depending on what you coach would determine how long your postseason run could be. So we would take the number of weeks times 440, and that's how we came up with the differential. So, for example, cross country. The IHSA regular season for cross country is 12 weeks. So if we look at the formula, 440 times 12 weeks is $5,280. And actually that should say 2 weeks of postseason. So if they were to, because we all know they go to regionals, but if they go to sectionals and state, they would have the potential to make 440, and then another 440. And then that total would go on to their 5,280. And then you, go ahead.
The first week of their postseason, isn't that one of those
He
every
said
one
it
of
should
those?
have been a 2 week.
Yes, that should have been.
1 week though.
Well, he's saying that that should have been, that 1 week of postseason should have been the additional week of postseason.
Yes. So that number down there should say 2 week of postseason because they could go to sectionals and state, so.
But isn't sectional something everyone does?
No.
Cross
Regional.
country, you have regional.
Cross country is
Okay,
regional,
okay.
yes.
I heard.
So the 520/80 technically could be 880 added to that, so that's like 60, they could make a, like 61 and some change. That's if they go to sectional and that's if they go to state. So we're basically paying them
For their time.
not so much for the incentive for getting kids there, it's if they get there, it's the amount of extra time, because that's 2 more full weeks of practice that they have to put in to those kids. Now, it doesn't matter if they got 1 kid going to state or they have a whole team going to state, it is that they are putting that extra time in for those extra weeks.
Okay.
Now, as a committee, and this is where, it's, these things, in my opinion, are specific to communities throughout the state. Every community has certain activities, certain sports that are more precious to their community. We as a committee felt that for Galesburg, football, baseball, softball, and boys and girls basketball are the ones that we identified as a more high-profile sport. That's for us, that's what we felt. In different communities, that would be different. Like, for example, in Orion, volleyball is God. So they would have, volleyball would be one of those sports that would be up there. Make sense? All right, so here's the difference. So,
Eric,
yes.
and we also put high priority and the same base salary on certain activities.
Yes, great
So
point.
we felt theater was a high priority activity, we felt band, we felt choir, those, and student council were the 4 that we identified as kind of high profile for the clubs and activities
Yeah.
portion of it.
Yep. So for this formula, instead of the $40,000, it's based off of a $55,000 base salary. Still the same thing. 55 times 1.1, so they're coming up with a weekly pay of $605. Same thing, times it by your postseason play, or your weeks, and then plus your extra postseason. So for example, for softball, 14 weeks regular season. Now remember, that's plus the regional, because everybody gets to go to the regional. So 605 times 14 is 8,840. And then add in the extra potential for the postseason for your time, and then you come up with 9,680. What potentially could be earned. Now, we also did this for assistants at the high school. We did this for junior high head coaches, junior high assistant coaches. The only thing that we tweaked a little bit was the number, the percentage that it was timed. Because it was 1.1 for the others, so we looked at 0.75 for JV and head coaches. Same thing, weekly pay. And this came up in, and I guess I should say, we did, bless you, we did have two extra meetings to kind of go over this with the staff. Rod was there and Russ was there, and all 3 of us were able to get that information out. We did one in the morning, one in the after school. So, but one of the questions that came up was, do assistant coaches benefit from the extra time in the postseason? And yes, that was something that we felt like not only the head coach, but your assistant coaches are also part of that puzzle making it work. They don't get what the head coach gets, but they get a percentage of that, just like the head coach would.
Well, it's based on their weekly pay.
Yes.
So the responsibility index is in the percentage
Right.
in there, right?
But that was a good question. Would the assistants get it? And yes, they would also be able to get that extra incentive for the time that they're putting forth. So we talked about at the beginning, one of the things with this would be the longevity increase. So we've got it for, it's just 1 through year 20. You start with what you would get for this coming year, 440, and then you can just see it's going to increase over time. And that would be for the high profile and the non-high profile, and it just kind of goes along. So the longer that you're in it, the longer your weekly pay would go up over time. And this is kind of what we kind of mentioned, we met in September to kind of set this, presenting it now. I think the goal is in March to kind of have it set in concrete so that this piece of the puzzle moving forward with the GEA is kind of done and out of the way so that we can focus on other things moving forward.
And the value of basically the new clubs and activities and then the increase in stipends is about $111,000 of new money that we're looking at putting on the table for coaching and clubs and activity. So it's a substantial financial commitment to increasing those salaries.
I think the biggest thing to look at is, number one, this gives us a way to put validity to what we're doing, as opposed to, we're just gonna take this number times a percentage and that's what you're gonna get. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So this gives us a great place to start from moving forward. Secondly, the longevity piece, I think is crucial. And then I think the last thing is, the extra, being able to compensate those individuals for all the extra time that they're putting forth is probably the biggest. I used to call it an incentive, but as I talk more with Rod at our last meeting, it's really not an incentive. It's for your time.
It's recognition that
Yeah.
you spent time.
Yeah.
As a former football coach who coached a team to the semifinals one year, I went to the superintendent and said, I'm making 24 cents an hour.
Right.
It's a distance. Obviously, I was thrilled we were going, but I said, it's kind of a disincentive. I'm not getting any more money, and yet I'm still having to stay here after school. I'm having to go to games on Saturday. I'm having to break down film. And so I appreciate this as a former coach, that it's just a reflection that it's more time. It's not really, hey, you're getting more money because it's an incentive to win. I mean, if you're doing it for that, you're at the wrong level. But it is, more time that they have to put in.
And the other thing, it's, as Rod and I talk, it's ultimately only as good as long as the contract is. So, if this moves forward and we get it, and then afterwards, things need to be tweaked, we can tweak them. At least we have a really good place to start with, instead of not reinventing the wheel. It's already, we've got it here. And I know Lori sent an email to us with some good questions and some things, because we had printed off all the sheets of all the clubs and everything that everybody coached, and let everybody see kind of how they would, what they make this year and what they potentially can make, so that they could see that. And then we looked at clubs, and it was whether it's a 12-month club or a 6-month club, so we were trying to.
It was partial year, full year,
Yeah,
partial year.
yeah, so we're trying to put those clubs and activities in one of those categories and then base it off of that. So there might be a little tweaking that we need to clean up, but for the most part, I think we're in a really, really good spot to start with moving forward.
And what was really interesting is, I was speaking to a retired teacher who was a longtime sponsor in this district, and I just said to him, I said, how did this percentage ever come about? Do you have any idea? And this is when we first started. And he said, yeah, I know exactly. He said, I made this amount of money in a previous district, and I needed this amount of money to come here. And so they created the stipend percentage based on that. So that was pretty eye-opening, that I think over time, maybe that happened. And that this gives us like a formula that's fair across the board to everyone, that it isn't just cherry picking, giving one club or sport more money than another, that there's a formula. And it also changes with IHSA, changes in their rules and their seasons. So we'll update that yearly. Eric will help us
Well,
with
yeah,
that.
because one of the main things coming is for boys and girls basketball, they're going to mirror the seasons. And right now, boys is longer than girls, but they're getting ready to have a state tournament where boys and girls will play on the same weekend. For cross country, they're in our class, we're in 2A. They're talking about getting rid of the regional because it's almost everybody goes except for a handful of kids. So it's like, why do we need to have this anymore? So as those things change, we would have to adapt to that. Yeah.
One thing that was eye-opening to me is when we did the comparison to the different schools, and I know that was a lot of work getting all that data, but this formula puts our pay to comparable to competing schools, so, you know.
With who?
Yeah.
Rock Eye.
Yeah,
Except
no,
for
we-
Iowa.
we-
Yeah.
They were definitely outliers.
Yeah.
And our activities as well.
Right, absolutely, because there was some activities that were definitely way underpaid.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the committee for all of that work.
I'm gonna pass it out.
All right, next. We had on our agenda item Bridgeway transition discussion. However, we're gonna table this item until next month because a lot of the information was actually being presented by Mrs. Springer, who's ill.
What does transition mean in this sense?
Transition meaning they have a lot of transition. Bridgeway has a lot of transition.
Personnel?
Yeah.
Correct. And we need to have a conversation about how that may or may not be impacting the contract relationship that we have with them.
Correct.
Okay, so then we'll move to the next item, consider approval of the risk management plan. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second?
Okay, are there any questions? Well, Mrs. Ham, do you have anything to add about the risk management plan?
The risk management plan is a plan that we update annually. It identifies areas in which in our budget we could potentially use tort funds for these activities and how we're going to address security, safety, and the health and wellness of our staff and students. Once again, in a risk management plan, it identifies all those areas that we are currently engaged in. Some of them are funded through tort, some of them are not. That is why the last page of the tort plan gives the tort budget for the year and what we are actually spending tort funds for. So this is statutorily required if we're going to expend tort funds in certain areas.
And this also correlates then with next month when we start to talk about the tentative levy for the tax year. This is the lead into that. So the recognition that our tax levy is related, tied directly to this tort risk management plan. So when we talk about tax rate next month, we will refer back to this document in part, just for that part.
Any questions? Allison?
Sherby?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Hennigan?
Aye.
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Aye.
Okay, it is 10:12, and we are now going to start a boundary discussion.
Okay, before you start on this, we have this packet that has 3 items in it. The phasing option from GHS, the differentials, and this K4, just in an attempt to increase our visibility or transparency. I would hope these get added to our agenda so people who want to look at what we
Amy's
discuss.
actually going to post them on the
We're gonna
website
post it on the
tomorrow,
webpage directly.
on our webpage.
Separate, as a separate document, it seems they should be included. I think they should, if you're doing that, they need to be both, because it's documents from our board meeting. And it should follow the board meeting if someone's searching for such documents. If you want to put something separately as well, that'd be good, but I think it should be, it's one of the documents we've reviewed in our packet.
If you want to, archive it and search for it later, it should be searchable.
Sounds good.
All right.
I'll get started if that's okay. So last month, we were tasked with looking at 4 and 8 and 12 block walking distances from the 3 remaining elementary schools. But I think it's also really important to, and I know we're late, but I think it's really important to refer back to the community meetings that we had 2 years ago, because a lot of what we're asking for is a direct reflection of those community meetings. And in those community meetings, it was repeated often that we needed to have educational spaces that were equitable, and that it did not matter where you lived in town. And so we are going to show you maps
but then also correlate with how many students would be in those buildings from those boundaries, but also then how many students would receive free and reduced lunches. And that is actually very important for a couple of reasons. One, because we want to have very similar educational experience for our students regardless of building. But secondly, and pragmatically, if we have a building that falls below 70% free and reduced lunch, we cannot offer the free lunch to everybody in that building, which we currently do in all our elementary buildings. So that would be a substantive change if we created boundaries that had a building that was not at that 70% level. So it's important for us to review that as we go forward. Paula?
Actually, I think Jen's gonna talk.
You know what, I'm just gonna go through a really quick PowerPoint just to give some background to everybody, and then Paulette's gonna pull up the maps. So, just really quickly here, the parameters for new boundaries that the board gave us last month were that we needed to look at a 4, 8, and 12 block walking distance from Silas, Steele, and King. We needed to attempt to create equitable and diverse student populations in each building. We needed to have a maximum student population at Silas of 450, Steele at 600, and King at 600, and be cognizant of the number of bus routes and the time on buses that students would be spending with our new boundaries. Immediately off the bat, there were problems with the 6, 8, and 12 block scenarios.
Well, and understand 6 was something we added because 12 immediately came off the list.
12 immediately came off, so then we started to look, okay, well, what if we do 6? What if we do 8? I cannot even begin to count the number of hours that Paulette has spent looking at different scenarios, her and I sitting and tweaking boundaries and trying to figure out how we could possibly make any of the scenarios work. And basically, at the end of the day, we had overlapping boundaries that occurred in all 3 scenarios, and achieving equity among our student populations could not be achieved. So our free and reduced populations were concentrated within 2 schools, and we had one school that, you know, fell to at times 50% free and reduced, which was problematic for our CEP status. So when we looked at the 4 block option, that is the one that Paulette's gonna show you the maps on tonight, and that became the option that we felt is most feasible at this point, and she's gonna show you how that plays out. In some areas, it's more than 4 blocks, but that was the starting point. So we're looking at, in this scenario, Steele having 545 students, Silas at 432, which is really about where they're at this year, so not a lot of change for Silas, and King at 561. That would give us free and reduced populations of 70% at Steele, 69% at Silas, and King at 82%. I want to point out that these are this year's populations. So one of the challenges we have here in Galesburg is we don't really know our kindergarten numbers prior to registration. So we know who is in our pre-K program, but that only comprises roughly 100, 120 students. We attempt to reach out to Head Start, but we have a lot of different places where kids receive pre-K services. So having a concrete number of the number of students. So what we do is we look at trend data, and we look at our kindergarten classes being at about 300. We really haven't seen kindergarten classes over that in the last few years, so that's the basis of kind of what we're using here to determine these. So these free and reduced population numbers may fluctuate a little bit depending on the kindergarten population that comes in. One of the questions that the board wanted answered was, for instance, at Steele, how many Steele students that are attending Steele this year under this scenario would then be going to Silas next year? Or how many students that are at Silas this year would be going to Steele next year? And for Steele, that would be 63 students. For Silas, that would be 89, and there were none in the King scenario because pretty much you're picking up Nielsen, you'll see when we look at the boundaries. We'll talk about next steps and additional information after Paulette shows you the maps.
So that was 4 block.
That was the 4 block radius, yes.
In the rural areas,
Where will they go?
You'll see,
Show
but
there.
depending on the location, so simply the west side of town goes to Steele. The east side of town, for the most part, goes to King, with the exception of kind of the northeast
Northeast
corner,
goes to Silas.
goes to Silas. It kind of bootlegs. Because when we looked at bus routes, it didn't make sense. Originally, we had a few of those kiddos going to King, but you had within maybe less than a half a mile, a Silas bus that would be out in the country anyways, and it didn't make sense to run a second bus way out in the country for 1 or 2 kids when we could just loop those in and pick them up and send them to Silas, so.
Currently, they do that.
Currently they do, but we're gonna be adding bus routes anyways, so we were trying to figure out how we could consolidate that as much as possible.
Are you wanting the Port Blanc then, hold on?
Yeah, so do you wanna show the our current boundaries, just so everyone can kind of see what those look like?
There's our current boundary right now.
So the green obviously is Gale, purple is Steel, in the center is Silas. We have Nielsen, that's kind of light blue aqua, and then King, which is green.
Is that on the website now, or
Is this on the website now?
the current? Because I looked for it, and I couldn't find it.
No, and we're gonna actually be putting these all up tomorrow.
Well, and this doesn't show all your rural areas either. This
Right.
basically is just contained.
I'd like to see the rule.
With the new maps we put out, we put the rural maps.
Do we leave busing routes up to first student to do?
No.
No.
Well, then we have done a bad job of the current routes.
They better tell us they did it then, huh?
I'm just gonna say that right now. Because 3 buses come by my house.
Well, it depends on so probably that has to do with the fact of, is it a K-5 bus, is it a junior high bus, or is it a high school bus? Because we have staggered start
special ed
times.
bus.
Or preschool.
Or a special ed bus,
Or preschool
right.
bus.
And you send a 56 passenger bus for 4 students.
It's usually 72 passengers.
Okay, the biggest bus you can get for 4 students.
What would that be?
Where do you live?
West.
Right down the road from Tom Hawkins.
So Route G,
West.
Route G.
Yep, we're
Talking
G
about
bus.
Bring those 4 kids, we wouldn't have a problem.
But there's a lot more kids than that assigned to it.
Yeah, that's
Is the
the
A lot of
problem.
the problem is
It
you
goes
can't.
3 blocks full, and it goes
Okay.
8 miles with 4.
But this is a check, okay.
I mean, it just, to me.
So there's a lot of, well, Member Phelps, there's a lot of factors that go into it. So bus routes are assigned on students whose parents have said they would like the option of bus riding, but that doesn't always happen. So routes are determined based on the number of students who have actually signed up for bus routes. And then oftentimes during the year, parents may make other decisions or other arrangements, so then you end up with a bus with only 4 students on it. But let's
Yeah, I remember.
move forward.
Are you done with this one?
Yeah, so pull up the 4 block radius one, please. So there's the boundaries with the rural included.
Can you,
Once
You
you
overlay
show-
the students with just blue students.
or can you span, or, go out just a little bit so you can see the entire.
So there's the student population. And we can, just so everybody's aware, we can filter by free and reduced lunch, but we're not gonna do that because you could start to identify students. So we're not gonna do that tonight.
But you can see the challenge is that the core of our student population is in the center of town. So trying to figure out a way to divide that up equitably posed a huge challenge in this scenario. Okay, can
Do
you?
you want it bigger, or
Zoom in,
Yeah.
do you want the students left on there?
try to take them off for now, just so you can see where the streets are. You wanna illustrate what they're looking at there, Paul?
Okay, the green is, the proposed steel, which is picking up, up north, you've got, Lake Story, in the rural northern part of the district. And
Folks
then-
that are in the audience, could you please not talk? Your voices carry a lot better than you think they do.
This entire area here and over to West Street was all Gale. And so it would be Steel. And down to Losey Street, all of that was Gale in here. And then Silas came over to West Street and took on both sides of West Street, which in this scenario, Broad Street, both sides of Broad Street would be the ending to Silas. And then this is the original Steel area here, so that would remain the same. And this corner right here was Steel as well, and this was Silas, and Steel picked up that area. And then the rule for Steel to the west, it remains the same, that didn't change. They just picked up everything west of 150, which was Gale. And then you jump over 150, this was Gale as well, but we've got that going to Silas. And then Silas.
West of 150.
Did I say, sorry, I meant east.
That's not 150, that's Broad Street.
No. If you get north of town.
And can you just pull out a little bit so we can look at like the full Gale map to the north?
Like that, you mean?
Yes. So that was the area where we had a couple of students. I mean, there was very few. Can you put the students back on there? So you can see that we're trying to maximize bus routes on that area. So we just have, you know, kind of one student there. We have a few scattered to the north there that we're hoping to pick up on that Silas route.
So all of this area was Gale, would now be Steel, or Silas, excuse me. This area here would have been Nielsen, which would be picked up at Silas. And then up here, this is maybe on the east side of Lake Story, was all Gale. That would now be Silas. And then up on Costa Drive, all of this area down to Sandburg was Gale, which would now be Silas.
Did the demographics not work that you could just come right down 150 all the way?
It really doesn't work. It heavily skews the low income over to Steel and takes it away from Silas Willard to where the point where Silas Willard is either high 40s or low 50s.
And then the other problem there was too, if you take in that little area, then we're over in population, we're way over the 450
Right,
at Silas. So it became a space issue
And then
as
you'd have
well.
to move the Henderson students to Steel, which we didn't want to do.
So on the chart earlier we had that there would be 89 current Willard students, including kindergartners who've never been there, correct? That's the projected number of kindergarten? Or
That
that's
is-
the 89 actual 2019?
If we were to change the borders today, that number is K4, K through 4.
So it's
That's
89
this year's
current
K4.
Okay, it does not include projected kindergarten.
Correct.
So they fall into the area primarily that goes west of the proposed boundary, correct? And down, the area that's going down to Losey, west of Broad, correct?
Silas?
Yes.
The-
What area do those 89 students come from?
Was that from steel
This
or
is
from?
how many from Silas are going to Steel next
Yes,
year.
yeah.
Yeah, that's what he's asking.
Oh, we're, so.
Okay, so yeah, it would have been, from the west,
West of Broad Street and down
west of Broad Street,
to
just,
the Gale boundary.
yeah, they're just with the 2 blocks. But down, this was all steel.
Yes.
And
what
this area here
Was Silas.
was Silas and is now steel. Does that answer your question, Maureen?
Yeah, I think so. It was a higher number than I thought it would be.
Well, I think that was the one where
Yeah.
24 of them were in the walking area, Silas, wasn't it? Did I have that on there?
Correct.
Yeah, those are the ones I feel worse about, because they're
Uh-huh.
within the currently not being bused area. Now
Oh,
we're putting them on a bus.
yeah, I can't disagree with that.
Yeah.
But it was really tough to get the percentages
And
close.
then there's the lower area that, in my mind, this new Willard boundary is like a bow tie, with the downtown area being in the middle, because it stretches out again into what used to be the Cook School area. They're picking up that, correct?
Yeah. And over here, this was Nielsen area. So that would be picked up at Silas. Birdland would go to King.
Yes.
And this area here was Nielsen, would now be Silas. This little corner here, if there are any students there, was King. But to make the line look better, I put it at Silas, but there are no students in this area. And then, yes, the bow tie, which would have Silas going clear down to the Bushmore Lyman area and everything south of Monmouth Boulevard.
Is
Which
going to Silas?
was all steel.
But they're currently bused to Steel, so we're gonna bus either way, correct?
Yes.
Except currently they're, for those children that don't get up in time to meet the bus, they're able to walk.
Well, the problem is they're crossing that railroad track, so we really don't.
Well, they're not really, the railroad tracks is the issue, it's Mount Boulevard is the issue, which isn't nearly as
Neither
busy.
good.
Railroad tracks. Those are abandoned tracks down there.
The ones in Henderson?
You gotta cross the main Burlington Northern.
Yeah, the one on Henderson right there.
On Henderson Street.
Yeah.
If you're gonna get to Silas.
Oh, the
That
Willard,
protects
right, I was
all.
talking about going the current, walking to currently to Steel.
Then
But
the-
still, on Monmouth Boulevard, you still have to cross that main track by Protexol.
Yeah, which is the main BNSF line.
That crosses Monmouth Boulevard.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously gonna be problems with any of these. The question is, do we want, seeing the maps here, are we still happy with the split of socioeconomic? Do you wanna see anything different? Do you want, are you not as concerned about socioeconomic and you wanna then look at walking areas? Because we're not gonna be able to do both.
I'm gonna make a very unpopular comment. I do not want a rich school. Point blank. I do not want us to get, this is part of the challenge that we have right now. There is a perception in town that there are schools on the north side of town are better than the schools on the south side of town, and it has everything to do with class and race. Don't want it. Period. That's my opinion.
And if that's important, then not that we can't tweak this, but there can't be major departures, because we sat there forever trying to figure out little carve-outs, and then there becomes a place where there's no rhyme or reason for why we're doing what we're doing. If you start doing carve-outs, it just becomes much less defensible. Whereas if you say, you know what, here's a street, let's just run down the street and let's commit to that. Because there's just, as I said, we're trying to make it so that there's some logic to how the lines are drawn. And there's always gonna be exceptions, of course. Paulette showed the one where there's a little bump out west of Broad Street, but it makes sense when you look at how the streets are arranged.
Yeah.
Because there's not access from the other side. But, you know, that we're trying to get some logic to this, and we know that there's never gonna be a perfect map, and we can tweak it. We just wanna make you aware that this is the culmination of, especially for Paulette, a lot of work of trying to get the numbers to work out evenly.
One of the questions that I had asked previously is about mobility. And obviously cutting from 5 to 3 elementary schools, your mobility rates will likely naturally decrease. But do we have any trends that tell us that there's mobility between certain elementary schools right now?
We're seeing a lot of mobility between King and Steele.
Okay.
And a lot of that's anecdotal, just knowing how that they're moving residents amongst the housing authority. So that should balance out. You know, we typically won't see as much mobility in kind of that core Silas area as we are in other areas.
Most of the mobility is east-west.
Yes.
Paulette, on this, the Willard southern boundary, how far south, what street is that at the far south end of that? That's horizontal. What is that? Doesn't have a name. Okay. What's the one just above it?
This one, is that what you mean?
Okay. No, I meant the longer horizontal one. Yeah, right there. What is that?
This?
No.
Left.
The
Horizontal.
diagonal one.
The east-west one.
Oh,
Right, what is that?
that isn't a street.
Oh,
That's their line.
that's the end of the district?
No, that's just the boundary.
That's the end of Silas.
It's just where a line is drawn for the boundary. It's not a street.
And what's the street above that then? That's a short word? What is it?
Sixth.
Oh, that's Sixth, okay.
Isn't that a railroad track though?
Here.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
go where
Yes.
it's
With a
fit.
T into it.
It's a-
That's the yard track.
Yep.
So the townhouses, or whatever name of that street, they'd be in Willard then? That Prairie Land Apartments?
Prairie Land, no, they'd be in King.
Or they'd be in King, they're
Yeah,
south.
they're over on Fifth Street.
Yeah, they're farther east.
They were within the 4-block, correct? Were they within?
If you didn't consider tracks, yes.
Right.
And the only apartments that I can think of in the Silas would be the 670 South Academy. Those apartments.
Down by the house.
Right.
Yep. You wanna overlay the students with it one more time, Paulette, just so they can get one in mental image of what that looks like. Bless you. So if you zoom in down to that King Silas border. See what we're talking about. It's fairly sparsely populated along the border. Now you get up in that, as you go a little bit more north, you've got some issues, but that's trying to level that out.
If board members have other thoughts, I know I spoke pretty passionately, I'm not gonna apologize, but that doesn't mean that I don't wanna hear the board members' thoughts. have successfully quieted the board.
Well, the free lunch is a big thing, and, you know, demographics come into play in everything we do, and the valiant effort that's been here, and I don't know how you do any different. We're gonna have some individuals that aren't gonna like it, because none of us like change, but we're trying to do the best we can do with it.
And the reality is, folks, as hard as we're working on this new boundary system, board policy states that we actually have to look at boundaries every year.
Yeah.
So if we're doing our job the way we have set forth through policy,
This will get looked at again?
the fact is it'll get looked at next year, it'll get looked at the year next, and so we have the potential to be equal opportunity, make people in the community mad for, every year to come.
Well, and, right, we had this discussion internally this week where I reminded them that, in fact, what you just said, that we're supposed to do this every year. That doesn't mean we have to change the boundaries every year, but we have to review it. We have to look at it. We can look at it and go, you know what, we should probably leave it where it is for a couple of years and see where we are. Or we look at it and go, that was a mess, let's move one street over this way, one street over that way. We have a responsibility to at least review it probably about mid-year every year. And say, this is what our demographics are, this is where we project them to be. Kindergarten's always a challenge, because we're getting some 4-year-olds here, not even the majority, to try to project where they go.
I really just thought the lines were gonna be just a little bit cleaner, but you followed the board's suggestions. And outside of hearing any other ideas from board members about different ways to draw the lines, I'm gonna wrap this conversation up because it's late.
To be revisited next month.
Well, the idea is that if we're okay with this concept right now, we would start to talk about bus routes and project out some of those things. And try to guess, to Rodney's point of, how many people would be on this bus route. Paulette does this every day. I used to do this, so I sat there with Paulette one day and we looked at this. And one of the reasons some of the lines are where they are is because having mapped out bus routes, you start to get a feel for buses going one direction and looping around and coming back another way. And so you'll have these students where there's 2 students sticking out here and you gotta put them somewhere. And you're trying to think about where's the bus gonna be coming from, so you think more of it that way. And the people may never ride a bus. And I definitely don't blame parents for saying, reserve a spot for my kid on a bus, even though they may never ride it. I don't blame them. I mean, that makes sense. But that's why you end up with more buses than you need, because you never really know who's gonna be riding. But you try to project out those routes as best you can. School districts that grow really fast typically put their schools at the edge of their boundaries, because then they can just put buses out and then they come back. So, I mean, if you could plan this, you put your schools at the borders and then you would just go out from a central hub. We're left with a little bit different solution at this point. So, this is our attempt at trying to meet all the masters we had, knowing that there's never gonna be a perfect border. But we tried to make some logic to it as best we could.
So while we are not officially approving borders, we're giving direction to move forward with transportation routes to see what this looks like.
Yep.
Are there board members in disagreement with that? No? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Hammond, Paulette, for your work.
Can we get like a PDF or something of this so that we can
So-
look at it in better detail and action together?
That's been an effort. So understand,
This is kind of a
we
nightmare.
wanted you to have that too, and the amount of time that was put into trying to create that map was creating less time to actually get the work done. So one of the deficiencies of TransFinder is not being able to print off a really handy dandy map. They can print off a big, huge, giant map, but a
a little small one is harder. So
But we could get like a PDF or something.
we are
so that
trying
I could
very
look
hard
at
to
it.
get that to you, yes.
Okay.
And
Because
then-
I'm sure parents or, you know, and homeowners want to know
Yep.
what this looks like too.
Yep.
And it's difficult for me to,
The other thing we
To
intend to
figure it
do
out.
is we wanted to make sure before we put the time and effort in going to a printer, but once we got direction tonight, we're gonna take these and have these blown up in large maps and distribute them to the K-5 buildings, so that if parents are at the buildings, they can go up and they can kind of see
This is
where
what
they're
we're-
living and where that would potentially be. So, if, you know, if they have any comments or feedback for the board before next month, they can do that. So, and we'll have a big copy of the map here as well, so.
All right, moving forward, because it is 10:45, and I'm always charged and teased because my meetings are long. It is not my fault, folks. It is not my fault. It is not. Consider approval of contract with Knox County Special Education for Services. Do I have a motion?
I'll move. Second.
In our previous contracts with them, it had dollar figures for certain services. I couldn't find that in this. What does that mean?
The dollar figures have been, we can attach that amount. The reason there's not hard and fast dollar figures that had originally been on the contract was because I insisted that not be on there, because what if we don't need the service? I didn't want to have to guarantee to pay for something,
So it
so.
wasn't an hourly rate?
That, yes, and that is, we've already agreed on that, that is there. I mean, it's based on their hourly rate that they have. This part of the agreement is just basically structuring that we're gonna do it, that we're gonna pay for it, that, you know, it's just basically
Okay, there
aligning the
is-
two. Yes, there is a background. that
Okay,
can
we already
send.
have those.
Yeah.
You're not gonna, it's not gonna be a.
It's not a
moving
shock,
target.
no, it is not.
Any other questions regarding this contract? Allison?
Cervantes?
Aye.
Hannigan?
Yes.
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Aye.
Sherby?
Aye.
Okay, moving on to the next agenda item, 11, personnel.
True.
Oh,
Good.
Two.
that's not on my.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, geez, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, before we move on to personnel, consider approval of trip request. Do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Any questions regarding these requests?
There was a typo on the one, it says 2019 and 2020 from Lombard.
Okay,
We're not
Allison?
going- We're not going back in time.
Yeah.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Hannigan?
Yes.
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Aye.
Sherby?
Aye.
I read the trip request in the agenda. Whoops,
Sorry.
I posted the agenda and then realized I forgot that item.
that's okay. All right, now moving on to 11, personnel. Do I have a motion to consider approval of the personnel report?
So moved. Second.
Rodney moved, Rod seconded.
Any questions? Allison?
Hannigan?
Yes.
Lyon? Phelps?
Aye.
Sherby?
Aye.
Cervantes?
Aye. Dr. Asplin, next item, grievance update.
Thank you. Yeah, we are still waiting on arbitration. Luke, have you gotten anything in the mail lately? I haven't gotten anything.
We have a date in December for
December.
a hearing. That's all.
And so we have, there have been 2 items out there for months. So the first item on the teacher evaluation is the one that's up for arbitration, and the other item is still
Correct.
in the abyss somewhere. We don't know where. Sorry. So no change from last month.
Okay. And next, report on FOIA requests to Dr.
I
Asplin.
did not have any this month.
All right, next up, I have a motion to consider approval of a 1-day unpaid suspension for employee number 16295 to be served at a time determined by the administration no later than December 31st, 2019.
So moved. Second.
Allison?
Lyon?
Yes.
Phelps?
Yes.
Sherby?
Yes.
Cervantes?
Aye.
Hannigan?
Yes.
And now, most people's almost favorite part of the meeting, comments by the Board of Education. Member Sherpy?
No comments.
Member Hennigan?
I'm very honored to be a part of this board, and I hope I can be an asset for the community.
Member Phelps?
No comments.
No comments today. I'll wait till next month.
Just a few. I want to welcome Member Hennigan to the board and excited to serve with one of my role models and mentors. Thank you. I will also say thank you to the members of the gallery for suffering through yet another long board President Cervantes meeting.
Are they all this long?
Only when there's good discussion.
Ever since you got on the board, they have.
Are there any future agenda items that board members want discussed? You will see that board boundaries, or the boundaries were part of that conversation a few months ago, and here we just had a 45-minute conversation about it.
At some point, I'd like, it probably won't get to the spring though, a report on how our instructional coaches is working out.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes, that is a planned presentation.
Our next meeting, our regular school district meeting, will be Tuesday, November 12th at 7 p.m. due to the holiday on Monday the 11th. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
We'll give-